Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I've always believed that people vanish for a reason. Maybe not one we understand, not one that makes sense on paper, but a reason shaped by forces deeper than the trail maps and GPS coordinates we trust. I've also learned that the mountains, especially the Smokies, don't give anything back they don't want to. Not even people. My name is Jason Langley. I'm 42, former Army medic, current full-time RV traveler. I left the city behind 5 years ago after a bad divorce and a worse burnout. I traded fluorescent lights for fire pits, high-rises for trailheads, and conference calls for the kind of silence you can only find miles deep in the wilderness. I've seen a lot. Mountain lions in Colorado, flash floods in Utah, a couple tweakers in a New Mexico rest area that I still think about sometimes. But nothing prepared me for what I experienced last fall in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I was camped at a semi-primitive site just outside the main tourist loops, far enough from Gatlinburg that you didn't hear traffic, but close enough that you could still get a signal if you climbed a ridge and held your phone up like a divining rod. I wasn't alone, not at first. There were 5 of us in a loose circle of RVs, 3 retirees in a fifth wheel from Florida, a solo van lifer named Cassie, and an older couple from Missouri, the Garlands, with Class C they'd named the Wanderer. They were the kind of people who made you feel like everything was fine just by how casually they move through the world. You need that kind of confidence in the woods, at least you think you do. We all kept to ourselves mostly, as RVers often do, but there was a comfort in knowing others were nearby. A shared fire here and there, borrowed coffee filters, a warning about a nosy raccoon, the usual rhythms. Until the third night, when things shifted. It started with the quiet. Now, you don't really notice quiet in the Smokies at first. It's a place that breathes silence. But I'd grown used to the subtle symphony of distant owls, wind through spruce, the soft crunch of deer moving just beyond the lantern glow. On that third night, the forest hushed like it was holding its breath. No bird song, no wind, no movement. I'd stepped outside just before midnight to check on the propane leak I swore I'd smelled earlier, and I remember thinking, this isn't normal. And then the knocking. 3 sharp knocks, not woodpecker-like, not branches falling, deliberate, measured. Like someone tapping a knuckle against hollow metal. They came from the direction of Cassie's van. I stood still for a moment, waiting to hear her door open, maybe a laugh, you hear that too? But nothing, just more silence. I walked a few feet toward her site, flashlight in hand, beam cutting through the fog that had begun to roll in low, heavy as a breath held too long. Cassie? I called out. No answer. I felt ridiculous. I wasn't about to go knocking on her rig like some nosy neighbor. People come out here for solitude. So I backed off, told myself I was overreacting, and went back to bed. By morning, she was gone. Not ran into town for breakfast, gone. Her van was gone. Site cleared. No note, no sounds of an early departure. And that van, a beat-up teal Dodge from the 90s, wasn't subtle. You heard it leave, but none of us did. The Garlands were the first to mention it. Did Cassie say anything about heading out early? Mrs. Garland asked over coffee. Nope, I said. She usually stayed late, watching the stars. She mentioned wanting to hike Klingman's Dome, Mr. Garland added, but it was more of a hopeful suggestion than a fact. Still, we all let it go. People leave. Maybe she got spooked. Maybe she didn't feel like saying goodbye. That happens out here more often than you'd think. But deep down, something was off. 2 nights later, the Florida couple left. No goodbye, no idle chatter. They'd seemed happy enough at dinner, shared a bottle of wine with the Garlands, then gone, sight empty before sunrise. And this time, we knew they hadn't driven off during the night. The roads were too loud, too narrow. Mrs. Garland had gotten up around 3 to use their composting toilet and said she saw their fifth wheel still there. By 6 a.m., it wasn't. That's when the dread set in. I tried to stay logical. Thought maybe they were all together, knew something we didn't. Like a better campsite opening up somewhere down in Cades Cove or near the lake. But the longer we waited, the more the silence crept in again. You could feel it watching, curling around your thoughts like smoke. I stopped sleeping. So did the Garlands. I'd see lights flicker in their rig at all hours of the night, Mr. Garland stepping out with a shotgun resting low across his arms. Then came the scratching. Not outside. Inside. It woke me around 2 a.m., the unmistakable sound of something dragging across my RV's floor. Slow, deliberate, like nails. I shot up, heart pounding, half expecting a raccoon that got in through a window or vent. But when I flipped on the lights, there was nothing. No open doors, no food disturbed. Just the faint smell of mildew and copper, a smell that lingered longer than it should have. I didn't tell the Garlands at first. I was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe I dreamt it. Maybe it was stress. But the next morning, Mr. Garland looked at me across our coffee mugs and said, "You ever feel like something's crawling around in here that doesn't belong?" That's when I knew I wasn't imagining it. That night, we decided to keep our rigs close, parked tighter, pulled out chairs by the fire and stayed awake together, sharing bourbon and half-spoken fears. "We should leave," Mrs. Garland said. Her voice cracked like she hated even admitting it. "I want to," I admitted, "but I don't want to bring something with me." We didn't talk much after that, just sat in silence, watching the tree line, listening for movement, waiting for a sound to tell us it was safe, or not. And then, just past 3 a.m., we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, crunching gravel. Not hurried, not lost, just wrong. Not animal, not trying to hide. And they stopped exactly 10 feet from our circle of light. I don't think I breathed for a full minute. The footsteps had stopped just outside the ring of our firelight. The kind of pause that makes your skin tighten like it's trying to shrink off your bones. Nothing moved, no wind, no insects. Just us, me and the Garlands. Holding still in that wide-eyed silence like prey trying not to trigger a predator. Mr. Garland had his shotgun across his lap. I had my Leatherman in one hand and a Maglite in the other. Like either one was going to matter if what I suspected was out there was more than just a person. We were angled the dark tree line, that endless black curtain between firelight and the unknowable. "Who's out there?" I called out. Nothing. Then the footsteps resumed. But this time, they circled. Slow, deliberate crunches, boots on grit, dry pine needles shifting under weight. The sound made a perfect arc around our sight, just beyond where the light could reach. Whoever it was, whatever it was, never stepped into view. It kept just out of sight, just where your mind could project anything it wanted. Mrs. Garland started to cry, soft, muffled, but I could hear it. And I'll never forget the way her husband reached for her hand without ever taking his eyes off the darkness, like he didn't dare blink. Then silence again. Not fading footsteps, not a retreat. Just gone, like a record skipping into blank vinyl. 1 second there, the next, nothing. No movement, no sound, just the weight of it hanging over us. We didn't go inside. None of us could. We stayed by the fire until dawn cracked over the treetops like a lifeline. Even then, I didn't feel relief, just exhaustion with edges. I scanned every inch of the clearing. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs anyone had been there. That morning, Mr. Garland said something that changed everything. "I don't think it's a person." I didn't want to agree, but I did. Somewhere in my gut, that primal place that doesn't deal in logic or evidence, I knew it too. He went on. "Something's wrong with this place. Maybe always has been. People vanish out here. Hikers, campers, hunters, and no one talks about it. They say it's terrain, weather, but that ain't the whole story." I nodded slowly. I'd read some of those stories online before, threads about missing 411 cases, weird disappearances in national parks, things no one could explain. But I never thought I'd be in one. We decided that morning we'd leave together. One convoy. Safety in numbers. But first I wanted to hike up to a bluff I'd seen the week before. Cell reception there was spotty, but sometimes you'd get a bar or two, enough to send a message, maybe even a call out. "I'll go," I told them. "Be back in 2 hours. If I'm not, leave." They didn't argue, just watched me pack my day bag with quiet, grim faces. The trail started clear, but the deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to shift. Not dramatically, just subtly wrong. The trees felt closer, the air heavier. I heard things, not voices, not exactly, more like memories out of place. My name whispered too low to trace. A familiar laugh from a friend I hadn't seen in years, things that don't belong in the woods, sounds that hook into the corners of your sanity. About halfway up, I found something that froze me cold. A boot, just one, tucked under a thick root like it had been placed there. Not dropped, not kicked aside, but tucked, like a keepsake. It was muddy and weathered, but the color was unmistakable, faded teal leather. Same as Cassie's boots. I'd seen them when she was crouched by the fire that first night, lacing them slowly, smiling to herself. The kind of thing your brain catalogs without knowing why, until it becomes important. I picked it up. It was dry, no moisture, no rot, like it hadn't been sitting there long. And next to it, half covered in dead leaves, was a Polaroid photo. It was face down. I hesitated before flipping it because every part of my instincts screamed, don't. But I did it anyway. It was us, our campsite, the circle of RVs, me by the fire, the Garlands in their chairs, Cassie's van in the background, taken from the woods, from above, or maybe from between the trees. I didn't remember anyone taking it. I didn't even remember anyone being there when it could have been taken. My mouth went dry. I looked around, high, low, deep into the brush, but nothing moved. Not a bird, not a leaf. The air felt held. I dropped the boot, stuffed the photo in my pack, and I ran. Not hiked, ran. I couldn't tell you how long it took me to get back down. Could have been 20 minutes, could have been hours. Time wasn't behaving right. The sun seemed stuck. My legs burned, lungs ached, but I didn't stop until I saw the curve of the Garland's rig through the trees. And that's when I knew something was wrong again. Their RV door was wide open, chairs tipped over, fire pit still smoldering, and the silence deeper than before. Final, almost. I stepped into their rig, slowly, carefully. My flashlight cutting through the interior, empty, no blood, no struggle, just absence, and something else. A smell. It was faint but sharp, like scorched hair and rust. I gagged, backed out, called their names again and again, but the woods had no intention of answering. Then I saw it. Another Polaroid, clipped under their windshield wiper, same angle, same distance, taken from the trees. This time it was just the two of them, sitting by the fire the night before. Unaware, smiling. I didn't think. I just jumped into my RV and started the engine. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in. Tires spun in gravel, branches scratched down the side as I tore out of that clearing like it was on fire, and I drove. Didn't stop for hours. Not until I hit a ranger station near Townsend and collapsed in front of a startled volunteer who probably thought I was high or insane. I told them everything, every detail. They nodded politely, wrote things down, promised to check it out, but nothing happened. Days passed. I went back with 2 rangers and a deputy. The Garland site was empty. No sign they'd ever been there. No RV, no chairs, no ashes. The spot looked untouched. The only thing left was a final Polaroid, clipped to a low branch. This one showed my RV leaving. I didn't sleep for days after that. Even once I left the Smokies behind me, Tennessee in my rearview, Georgia just a blur, Alabama passing like a ghost, I kept checking my mirrors. Not just for headlights, but for something else. Something I couldn't name. Something watching, waiting, tracking. Every bump in the road felt like a tap on my shoulder. Every tree line seemed to lean in a little closer. I drove in daylight, slept in truck stops under neon lights and within earshot of diesel engines. Because silence, I learned, is where it waits. But here's the thing. I kept thinking about those photos, those Polaroids, the angles they were taken from, the timing, the presence behind them. That thing wasn't just watching, it was choosing, selecting, and documenting. That's what broke me most. It was intentional. I contacted the police again once I was in Birmingham, filed another report, shared everything, again, showed them the photos. They barely glanced at them. Some local cop shrugged, said it was probably staged. I knew right then nobody was coming to help. No one was going to believe this unless they saw it with their own eyes. And even then, I tried looking up the Garlands, dug through forums, campsite registration logs, even called a few ranger stations pretending to be a relative. Nothing. No record of them. No missing person reports filed. No vehicle matching theirs registered under their names. It was like they never existed. That thought drove me half mad for weeks. Because I knew them, I'd eaten with them, heard their voices, laughed at Mr. Garland's bad jokes, watched the way he held her hand like they were still 22. They were real, and now they were gone, like the mountain swallowed them whole and wiped its mouth clean. I kept that last Polaroid, the one in my RV leaving. I keep it in a box now, under the floor panel near the water heater, a place no one ever looks, because sometimes I can't bring myself to touch it, but I also can't throw it away. because there's something I noticed months later that chilled me to the marrow. In the bottom corner of that photo, barely visible in the shadows between trees, there's a silhouette, a tall figure, thin, wrong, just standing there. Watching my RV drive away, almost waving. Every time I see it, my stomach knots, because I realize I didn't escape. It let me go, and I think I know why, because now I'm the one telling the story, the one carrying it. The Smoky Mountains are old, older than most of this country. They hum with things deeper than time. The Cherokee called them shakanaj, place of the blue smoke. But that haze that clings to the ridgelines isn't just mist or humidity. Not always. Sometimes I think it's the breath of something sleeping or something hunting. The disappearances in that region, you can look them up. Names scrubbed from databases, last known sightings that make no sense. Stories of campers walking into the woods and never returning. Some folks think it's a serial killer. Others say it's just the wilderness being cruel. But I know better now. It's not just one place in the Smokies. It's many, scattered along forgotten trails, off books, past old fire roads with faded markers, sites that don't show up on maps anymore, places with names erased by time or taken out of circulation by quiet hands. You might stumble into one of them without knowing, might think it's just the perfect hidden spot. And that's the trap. You won't feel it right away. It's subtle, like the way the birds stop singing a little too early in the evening, or how your fire burns too quietly, or how your dreams feel crowded. You'll brush it off at first. You'll be like me, rational, practical, anchored in common sense, until you see something you can't explain, hear something that doesn't belong, find something that knows you. Maybe you'll get out, maybe, but you'll carry it with you too, and eventually it'll want to see who you tell, who believes you, and who's brave or foolish enough to follow your trail back. Because that's what this is, isn't it? A trailhead. Every story we tell about danger, it's an invitation. That's the truth behind horror. We aren't trying to warn people, we're tempting them. Every vanished RV, every empty campsite, every echo in the hills, the story travels further than the victims ever could. The real vanishing act is how these things get buried under bureaucracy, natural causes, or got lost off trail. But they're not lost, they're taken. And sometimes they come back. Or rather, something else comes back wearing their shape. I passed a rest stop in North Carolina not long ago. Was filling up my tank when I saw a familiar teal van parked across the lot. Same faded color, same bumper sticker, take only pictures, leave only footprints. I nearly dropped the pump. I walked over, heart in my throat. But when I looked inside, no one was there. Just an empty driver's seat, windows fogged, a single boot on the passenger floor, and on the dashboard, a photo, my RV, taken from behind, parked just off a dirt road, timestamp dated tomorrow. I didn't wait. I ran back to my rig, heart jackhammering in my chest. Drove 4 states before stopping again. I don't know how it follows. I don't know why. But I know this. It doesn't need to chase you. It waits. It marks you. And when the time's right, it calls you back. So if you're hearing this and you're thinking about visiting the Smoky Mountains, maybe for a peaceful week off-grid, sometime in nature, a quiet RV spot no one knows about, ask yourself one question. When's the last time you heard someone else's version of the story? Not from a blog, not from a park ranger, but from someone who came back, because the truth is, most don't. And the ones who do, they don't talk. Not because they can't, but because if they do, it starts again, just like it started with me. And now, maybe with you. So keep your eyes on the tree line, listen closely to the quiet, and if you ever find a Polaroid on your windshield, drive. Don't look back, don't ask questions, and never camp in the same place twice. Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I never thought much about camping alone. I'm the type who craves solitude now and then, the kind of person who finds peace in leaving the world behind for a while. When life back home becomes overwhelming, a trip into the wilderness always seems like the perfect escape. No phone calls, no emails, just nature and quiet. So when the stress of my life got to be too much, I decided to rent an RV and head into the heart of Texas hill country. The reviews for the campground I found were glowing, peaceful, remote, with a handful of other campers scattered across acres of forest. It sounded perfect, exactly what I needed to clear my mind. I arrived just before sunset, the orange glow of the dying sun casting long shadows across the narrow, winding dirt road leading to the campsite. The place was more isolated than I had expected. Maybe 3 or 4 other RVs scattered around the grounds, some tucked away in the trees. I parked my RV near the edge of the woods, feeling comforted by the distance from the others. I liked it that way. The quiet, the space. The campsite was alive with the sounds of evening, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I sat outside making a simple dinner, grilled chicken, some canned beans, and a cold beer. The sky above was clear, the stars starting to prick the velvet black of the night. I locked the RV doors before heading inside around 11:30 p.m. There was something about the stillness of the night that felt oddly comforting, like the world had paused for a moment just for me. I crawled into bed, the warmth of the blanket surrounding me, and drifted into a deep sleep. But then came the noise. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft click, like something shifting in the dark. I stirred, blinking into the darkness of the RV. For a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing, maybe just a branch scraping against the metal. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, the unmistakable sound of the latch on the RV door being disturbed. My heart immediately started to race. I had locked the door, or at least I thought I had. The uncertainty gripped me. Could I have missed it? Did I lock it properly? But hearing that sound again, the click of the latch made the air in my lungs tighten. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was trying to get inside. I lay there motionless, trying to steady my breathing, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly wrong. Was it an animal? Maybe a raccoon or a deer? But no, that sound was too delicate, too precise. The door. Someone was tampering with the door. My mind was spinning, each second stretching out like hours. The only thing within reach was a small flashlight sitting on the counter next to the kitchen. Not much of a weapon, but it was all I had. I didn't want to move, but I knew I had to. If someone was outside, I needed to know who they were. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that making a sound, anything, would make things worse. I lay still, barely breathing, as the sound of the latch clicking grew louder. Closer. I could feel the darkness pressing in, thick and heavy, like it was alive, watching me. My body was frozen, but my mind was running a mile a minute. What if it was another camper? Why wouldn't they knock? Why would they open the door so quietly? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. My hands were trembling as I reached for the flashlight. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat like a drum of panic. I grabbed it, turned it on, and made my way toward the door. Every creak of the RV floorboard seemed to echo through the small space, louder than the last. My breath was shallow, caught in my throat. I was trying to keep quiet, trying to stay as still as possible, but I felt like every movement could betray me. When I reached the door, I paused. My heart slammed against my chest, my thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. I had to look, but part of me didn't want to. What if the man was right there, staring in through the window? What if he was already inside? I took a deep breath, then glanced through the small frosted window next to the door. The moonlight was dim, barely enough to make out anything. But there, in the shadowed distance, I saw a figure. It was standing too still, like a statue. And the feeling of dread that washed over me was immediate and overwhelming. My heart thudded in my chest as I realized the door was slightly open, just enough for a person to squeeze through. My blood ran cold. Could it be another camper? Someone who'd gotten lost or drunk and decided to stumble onto my RV? But why hadn't they knocked? Why had they opened the door so quietly? And why did it feel like I wasn't supposed to see them? Then, without warning, the figure moved. I froze. There, standing halfway inside the RV, was a man. His face was so close to the window that it seemed to press against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight at me. The coldness of his gaze chilled me to the bone. It was like he'd been waiting for me to notice him, to look into those eyes. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to scream, to fight back, but my body didn't move. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a sound. He just stood there, watching me. His ragged jacket swayed slightly in the breeze. His hair was matted, dirty, and his face was gaunt, hollowed by something darker than fatigue. There was something wrong about him. Something that wasn't just unsettling, it was dangerous. His eyes weren't wild or panicked. No, they were far too calm. It was the calmness of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who was hunting. I didn't know who this man was, but every fiber of my being screamed that he wasn't here to talk. He wasn't here for a friendly chat. I had to act. I grabbed the flashlight, flicking it on and shining it directly into his face. The light illuminated his features in stark detail. His eyes reflected something more than madness, something colder, like a predator staring down its prey. The light caught the sweat beading on his forehead, his uneven breath coming in ragged gasps. There was a flicker of recognition, but it didn't make sense. Had I seen this man before? Was he someone from the news? I could barely think straight. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I could feel the blood rush to my face. Who are you? The words came out of my mouth in a hoarse whisper. I didn't know why I even asked. What good would it do? He didn't seem interested in answering. He didn't respond. Instead, his hand reached toward the door, slowly pushing it open wider. It creaked, like a warning, like an invitation. My mind raced. What the hell was I supposed to do? I couldn't stay here. I couldn't run either, not with him blocking the doorway, but I couldn't wait for him to come inside. Then, just as panic started to take over, I heard it. A rustling, something in the trees, a truck engine, a distant hum, growing louder. Closer. I wasn't alone. With pure instinct, I rushed to the driver's seat. My hands trembled as I grabbed the keys from the dashboard. With a desperate jerk, I shoved them into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life. The man outside flinched violently, jerking back as if the sound had physically struck him. And then, I was gone. I saw him drop low, crouching down just outside the RV's threshold, trying to shield himself from the sudden noise. His hands shot up in a defensive reflex, but as he did, something small, maybe a rock or some tool, clattered to the ground, the sharp sound echoing in the still night. The noise was enough to shake him, but it also bought me a precious second. Before he could react further, I slammed the RV into drive and floored the gas. The tires screeched on the dirt road and the RV lurched forward, throwing me back into the seat. I didn't look back as the campground disappeared behind me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I didn't know who that man was or how he had gotten so close without me hearing a single sound, but one thing was certain, he wasn't just lost in the woods. He was hunting. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. I've always found comfort in the silence of the woods, out here away from people, away from the world. You can think straight. George Washington and Jefferson National have been my sanctuary for years, my escape from the clutter of civilization, but this time something felt different. It was as if the land itself was holding a secret it didn't want to share. It had been a rough few months. Lisa left me, and I couldn't say I didn't see it coming. I'd been distant, losing myself in work, then losing the work altogether. I thought a few days alone, hunting and camping would clear my head. I needed space, and the mountains were the only place I knew where I could truly breathe. The plan was simple. 3 days, 4 tops. Head out to the edge of Silent Pines, an area where the deer roam freely and the mountains are still untouched by the tourist crowd. I'd bag a buck, maybe 2, and return with meat for the freezer. Just me, my gear, and the quiet hum of nature. But it didn't take long for that comfort and hum to go disturbingly quiet. The first day was uneventful, at least at first. I parked my truck at the trailhead, loaded up my pack, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and began the familiar hike into the heart of the forest. My boots crunching over the leaf-covered trail as I climbed higher, the dense trees closing in around me. The fresh mountain air was cool, the perfect kind of crisp that made you feel alive, but something was off. I noticed it halfway through the hike. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, were missing. There was only the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional creak of the trees swaying gently in the wind. I shook it off as nerves. It was always a little eerie out here in the deep woods, especially when you were alone. That was part of the appeal. I told myself it was just the tension I'd been feeling lately, everything weighing on my chest, turning normal things into problems. I set up camp in the clearing near the stream I remembered from previous trips. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountain ridge, casting long shadows over the landscape. The fire crackled warmly as I cooked up some canned stew, sipping from a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, trying to push away the gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't until later that night, after the fire had burned low and I was stretched out in my sleeping bag, that I noticed the first real sign: footsteps. At first, I thought it was just an animal. I mean, what else could it be? Deer? Maybe a raccoon? But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like someone walking, a soft, deliberate crunch in the leaves, moving slowly as if it was circling the camp. I lay still, holding my breath, listening intently. The steps grew closer, then stopped. I sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight and rifle by my side. The firelight flickered dimly, casting long, jittery shadows around the clearing, but there was nothing there. I scanned the tree line, heart pounding harder than I'd like to admit. Nothing moved, just trees standing tall and silent, watching. Must have been the wind, I muttered, my voice shaky. I lay back down and my grip tight on the rifle. I'd always prided myself on being a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy, but something about those footsteps didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the sound itself. It was the feeling that came with it, like I was being watched. The next morning, things got worse. My water jug was gone. I thought I'd been careful about where I left it, but maybe I hadn't sealed it tight. Maybe an animal dragged it off during the night. I searched the area looking for signs of raccoons or coyotes, but all I found were footprints, human, barefoot, and small like a child's. But what child would be wandering around the woods, miles away from the nearest road, in the dead of night? I crouched down, running my fingers over the soft dirt where the prints had pressed into the earth. They seemed fresh, leading in a slow, meandering pattern around the campsite before disappearing into the woods. My skin crawled, a chill running down my spine as I stared at the tracks, my mind racing through every possible explanation. None of them made sense. By midday, I had convinced myself it must have been some local kids playing a prank. Maybe I'd stumbled into someone's turf without realizing it. But as I hiked deeper into the woods, rifle ready, the sense of unease only grew stronger. Every step I took felt heavy, like the trees themselves were watching me, closing in tighter. Then I saw it. I was tracking a deer along the ridgeline when I noticed movement in the trees just ahead. At first, I thought it was the buck I'd been hunting, but then it stepped out into the clearing. A figure, tall, hunched, and gaunt. Its body was draped in shadow, but I could see the faint outline of its pale, too long limbs, twisted in ways a man shouldn't be. And those eyes, two glowing yellow eyes staring right at me. I froze, rifle raised, heart hammering in my chest. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the wind dead and still around us. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, it just stood there, watching me. "Who the hell are you?" I called out, my voice cracking in the silence. No answer. I swallowed hard, taking a step back. The figure disappeared into the trees as silently as it had appeared. My hands were shaking, the rifle's barrel wobbling as I lowered it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, but I knew better. I'd seen it, and whatever it wasn't human. That night, the footsteps returned, louder this time, circling the camp with purpose. I stayed awake, rifle in hand, listening to the crunch of leaves as it moved closer. Every time I thought I'd hear it right outside my tent, the steps would stop, leaving only the suffocating silence. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even close my eyes without imagining those yellow eyes watching me from the darkness. By the third day, I was a mess, exhausted, jumpy, paranoid. I hadn't seen the figure again, but I could feel it following me, watching. The forest, once my refuge, had become a prison. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how fast I walked, no matter how deep I went, it was always just behind me, waiting. That afternoon, I found more footprints. This time, they were right outside my tent, circling it in strange, looping patterns. There were dozens of them, overlapping, almost chaotic, as if someone or something had danced around the camp all night. My heart raced as I traced the tracks, panic creeping into my bones. The final straw came that evening. I was sitting by the fire, trying to calm my nerves when I heard it again. The soft, whispering voice carried on the wind. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of the trees, but I could make out one thing clearly. It was my name, Nate. I shot to my feet, spinning around, scanning the darkened woods for any sign of movement. The voice called again, softer this time, but closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, stuffed it into my pack as fast as I could, heart pounding in my ears. I needed to leave now. Whatever was out there, whatever had been stalking me for days, wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. As I slung my pack over my shoulder and reached for my rifle, I felt it, a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing at the edge of the firelight, was the figure. Tall, twisted, with limbs too long and eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Its face was pale and gaunt, hollow eyes staring into me as if it could see straight through my skin and into my soul. I raised the rifle, but before I could pull the trigger, it vanished. Just gone, like smoke dissolving into the night air. I ran. I didn't care about the trail, didn't care about my gear. I ran as fast as I could through the forest, branches slapping at my face, rocks and roots tripping me up as I sprinted blindly through the trees. I could hear it behind me, the soft crunch of footsteps following, never far behind. By the time I reached the trailhead, my lungs were burning, my legs felt like jelly, and my mind was racing with fear. I threw myself into the truck, slamming the door shut. The silence inside the cab was deafening. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, finally starting the engine and peeling out of there as fast as I could. Even now, weeks later, I can't get it out of my head. The figure, those eyes, the voice that called my name, luring me deeper into the woods. I haven't told anyone about it. No one would believe me anyway. Just another man who got lost in the forest, right? But I know what I saw. I know what was out there. I haven't been back to the mountain since, and every time I close my eyes, I still see it, watching, waiting. My name is Ansel Mosby. I was 36 years old when this happened. I've been living in my RV for 3 years now, moving from place to place, always searching for the next quiet spot. I tell myself it's for the photography, the landscapes, the wildlife, but deep down, I know the truth. I don't want to be around people. Green Swamp was just another stop, a place to set up for a few days, get some good shots, and move on before anyone noticed I was there. The land stretched for miles, thick with palmetto and cypress trees, the kind of wilderness that swallowed people whole. I liked that. I shouldn't have gone so deep. I parked off a narrow dirt road past the designated campsites. It was illegal, but no one was going to find me out there. The first day was uneventful. Just me, my camera, and the slow creep of the Florida heat. I hiked a bit, set up my gear near a clearing where I'd spotted a barred owl, and returned to the RV before sundown. Then the noises started. At first, I thought it was an animal. A rustling in the palmettos, a soft shifting sound like something moving just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, expecting to catch a raccoon or a stray hog. There was nothing there. The trees stood still. The wind didn't move. But the feeling in the air, it was heavy, charged, like something was watching. I locked up and tried to sleep, but the feeling stayed. The next morning, I checked my camera trap. It was gone. I'd left it mounted to a tree just 20 feet from the RV, aimed at the clearing, but the strap had been cut clean through. Not torn, not broken, cut. I swallowed my unease and chalked it up to poachers. I'd seen plenty of them in places like this, setting illegal traps or hunting without a license. Maybe one of them didn't want me filming. Then I found the footprints. They were barefoot, large, deep, leading into the palmetto. I turned back to the RV and spent the rest of the day inside, revolver within reach. That night, something woke me up. A single, deliberate tap on the window. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Tap, tap, tap. I reached for my flashlight, my fingers trembling, and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the window. There was nothing there. The palmetto rustled, though there was no wind. I stayed up until dawn. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I packed up, tossed my gear in the RV, and turned the key. The engine didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. I checked under the hood. Everything looked fine, but the battery was completely drained. Impossible. I'd just driven here 2 days ago, and everything had been working fine. I took out my solar charger and hooked up my phone. It was dead too. I swore under my breath I needed to hike back to the main road and flag someone down. I grabbed my revolver, my backpack, and a canteen and started walking. The forest felt different, smaller somehow. The trees leaned closer, their branches arching overhead like ribs in a carcass. The palmetto whispered as I passed. An hour in, I saw something up ahead, a figure, standing between the trees. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall, impossibly thin. Its arms hung too long at its sides. The sun was behind it, casting it in silhouette, but something was wrong with its face. There was nothing there, no eyes, no mouth, just smooth, empty skin. I blinked, and it was closer. I didn't think. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't stop until I saw the RV again. I locked the doors, drew the blinds, and sat with my back against the wall, my revolver clutched tight. I wasn't alone out here. The sun dipped low. The trees stretched long shadows across the ground. Then the radio turned on. At first, just static. But underneath, something else. A voice. Faint. Garbled. I turned the dial, trying to tune it in. It was my own voice. I froze. The radio crackled and I heard myself speaking. It's here. I see it. Then another voice. Low. Whispering. Right against my ear. Don't look at me. I threw the radio against the floor. The static didn't stop. Something slammed into the RV. The walls shook. The windows rattled. I gripped the revolver, sweat dripping down my back. Another hit. Harder this time. A shadow passed over the window. I clamped my eyes shut. Don't look at it. Don't look. A whisper curled through the air, pressing against my skin. Trade places. The air turned heavy, thick like water. My chest felt like it was caving in. Something brushed against the door. The handle rattled. I swallowed a scream. Then silence. I sat there for hours, unmoving. The whispering never came back. When dawn finally broke, I threw the door open and ran. I ran through the swamp, my legs burning, my lungs raw. I ran until I stumbled onto a dirt road and collapsed. A hunter found me hours later, dehydrated, delirious. He radioed for help. When I told him where I had been, his face paled. You were in his part of the woods. I didn't ask who he was. A week later, I went back for my RV. The engine started on the first try. The battery was fine. My phone turned on, fully charged. I checked my camera. Most of the photos were normal. Trees, the clearing, the swamp. Then the last one. It was me, sleeping in the RV, taken from outside the window. I left Florida that night, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the whisper. Don't look at me. I thought I knew isolation. I'd spent years driving across the country, chasing celestial events, camping in places no one else dared to go. Black Rock Desert was supposed to be no different. I'd chosen this spot because it was one of the darkest places in the United States, far from the light pollution of cities, with nothing but the stars above and the cracked earth below. A perfect place to watch the meteor shower I'd been anticipating for months. But the desert has a way of getting under your skin. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun blazing high, its rays bouncing off the endless white of the salt flats. The ground stretched out in every direction, flat and featureless, interrupted only by distant mountains rising like ghosts on the horizon. It was beautiful in a desolate way, the kind of place that makes you feel small and insignificant. Exactly what I needed. The RV's engine rumbled to a stop, kicking up dust as I parked. I opened the door, stepping into the dry, hot air. The silence was immediate. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of civilization, just a profound, almost oppressive stillness. I told myself it was peaceful, that this was what I wanted, a few days alone in the desert to focus on my photography and watch the night sky. But as I looked out over the vast expanse of cracked earth, a strange feeling settled in my chest, like a weight pressing down. I brushed it off. It had been a long drive, and the heat was getting to me. I'd feel better once the sun went down. I spent the first few hours setting up camp, adjusting my telescope and testing my camera equipment. The sky was still a blazing blue, but the desert's unforgiving heat was beginning to fade, replaced by a sharp chill as the sun sank lower. By the time dusk arrived, the temperature had plummeted, and I retreated into the RV to grab a jacket before stepping back outside. That's when the radio first crackled to life. I'd brought my old ham radio along, hoping to catch some weather updates or maybe listen in on local astronomy broadcasts. I hadn't expected much out here, but the static-filled hum surprised me. I turned the dial, searching for a signal, and for a moment I thought I'd found one, a faint voice cutting through the static. "Don't stay." I froze. The words were barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind, but they were unmistakable. I leaned closer, adjusting the frequency, but the voice was gone, replaced by the familiar hiss of static. I turned the radio off, chalking it up to interference, old equipment, or weird atmosphere. Still, the unease in my chest was growing. The first night was incredible. The sky came alive with meteors streaking across the blackness, more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. I stood in awe, snapping pictures, adjusting my telescope, completely losing track of time. Out here, under the stars, the rest of the world felt far away. It was just me, the night, and the vastness of space. And yet, something nagged at me. When I reviewed the photos later, I noticed something strange in the background of one of my long exposure shots. There was a blur, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Dust on the lens, maybe, or a glitch in the camera's settings. But as I scrolled through the rest of the images, the blur appeared again and again in each photo. It seemed to be getting closer to the RV. I wiped the camera lens, took another shot, and stared hard at the screen. Nothing. It had to be some kind of artifact from the desert air, the heat mixing with the cold night, playing tricks on the lens. Still, the feeling in my chest tightened. I turned in early, trying to push the unease aside, telling myself I'd check the equipment in the morning. Day 2 was different. I woke to a stifling heat that even the RV's air conditioning couldn't seem to fight. I cursed, fiddling with the controls, but the air blowing through the vents was weak and warm. I grabbed a bottle of water and stepped outside, hoping the breeze would provide some relief. But the air was dead still as the grave. I spent most of the day trying to fix the RV's engine, which had been acting sluggish since I arrived. I knew I should be enjoying the desert, but the more time I spent out there, the more the silence started to gnaw at me. It wasn't the peaceful isolation I had expected. It felt watchful. As the day dragged on, the sun beat down, turning the ground beneath my feet into a furnace. The radio, which had been quiet since last night's strange transmission, crackled to life again. This time the voice was clearer. "Danger. You need to leave." I dropped the wrench I was holding, staring at the radio in disbelief. The voice was faint, distorted like it was coming from miles away, but it was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was speaking to me. I snatched up the radio, twisting the dial, trying to find the source. Static. Nothing but static. The voice was gone again, leaving me standing in the middle of the desert, sweat running down my back, my heart hammering in my chest. I should have left then. I should have packed up and driven out of there. But the RV's engine was still stalling, and part of me didn't want to admit that I was spooked. This was why I came out here, wasn't it? To face my fears, to be alone in the dark. I stayed. And that night, the shadows came. The meteor shower was more intense on the second night, the sky alive with fire and light. I sat by the RV, staring up at the heavens, the vastness of the universe overwhelming. But no matter how beautiful the stars were, my eyes kept drifting back to the edges of the desert, where the darkness seemed to pool, thick and impenetrable. It was there, at the far edge of my vision, that I first saw the figure. A shape, standing just beyond the reach of my campfire's light. At first I thought it was a trick of the eye. The desert plays with your perception. Distances blur, shadows stretch, but when I blinked, the figure was still there, standing, watching. I grabbed my camera, adjusting the focus, snapping a shot before the figure disappeared. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, maybe an animal or even another camper who'd wandered too close. But when I checked the camera's screen, my blood went cold. The figure wasn't human. It was tall, too tall, with elongated limbs and a strange, distorted form. It was like a shadow brought to life, a smear of darkness against the starlit sky. The more I stared at it, the more unreal it looked. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I slowly lowered the camera. When I looked again, the figure was gone. The air was suddenly freezing, the kind of cold that bites at your skin. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me, my heart racing. I told myself I was imagining things. The desert played tricks on people. I'd read about it. People seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices carried on the wind, but that didn't explain the figure in the photo. The night dragged on, and I stayed awake, listening for anything, any sound, any movement. But all I heard was the persistent hum of the radio and the static growing louder by the minute. The next day, I knew I had to leave. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just my imagination. The figure, the voices, I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I packed up as quickly as I could, but when I turned the key in the ignition, the RV sputtered and died. I tried again and again. Nothing. I stepped out into the desert, sweat pouring down my face. The heat was oppressive, and the silence pressed in on me, suffocating. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal, and the radio was useless, just a constant, garbled stream of static. Then the voice returned, louder than ever. "Stay. Come closer." It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. And when I looked out across the desert, I saw the figure again. Closer this time, standing in the distance. Its form was hazy and indistinct, but unmistakable. It was waiting for me. My legs felt like lead as I backed toward the RV, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air was freezing now, the warmth of the day gone, replaced by a bone-deep chill. I knew in that moment that if I stayed, I would become like the figure, a shadow, a ghost, trapped in this forsaken place, wandering the desert forever. I ran. I don't know how I got the RV started. Maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe sheer panic. But when the engine finally roared to life, I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't look back. The figure, the voice, the cold, they all faded into the distance as I sped across the salt flats, the desert stretching endlessly behind me. I never looked at the photos again. I couldn't. Whatever was out there, it was better left unseen. I'll never return to Black Rock Desert. Some places were meant to be empty. My name is Bram Shaw, and this happened to me on August 14th, 1999. I was a long-haul truck driver hauling freight across the country. I drove a beat-up Kenworth W900, and my route took me through some of the most desolate parts of the United States. This time, I was headed from Memphis to Albuquerque, a long, lonely stretch of road that I'd driven more times than I cared to count. I'd been on the road for about 10 hours and was making good time. The CB radio crackled occasionally with the usual chatter from other truckers, but mostly it was just me and the hum of the engine. I had planned to stop for the night in a small town called Tucumcari, New Mexico. I liked the place. It had a decent truck stop, and the folks there were friendly enough. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the flat, arid landscape. I had just passed through Amarillo and was pushing on when my truck started acting up. It began with a slight shudder, then a loud bang, and before I knew it, I was coasting to the side of the highway. I got out, cursing my luck, and popped the hood. The engine was steaming, and it didn't take long to figure out that my radiator hose had blown. I was stranded. I grabbed my toolbox and flashlight, but I knew it was a lost cause. I didn't have a spare hose, and the nearest town was miles away. I got back in the cab and picked up the CB mic, I'm hoping to catch a friendly voice. Breaker 19, this is Roadrunner. Any of you good buddies got your ears on? I'm broke down just west of Amarillo, over. I waited, but there was nothing but static. I tried again, still nothing. I sighed and leaned back in my seat. It looked like I was spending the night right there. I made myself as comfortable as I could and closed my eyes, hoping to get some rest before dealing with my situation in the morning. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I heard the knock. It was a light tapping on my window. Groggy, I sat up and looked out, expecting to see another trucker or maybe a good Samaritan. Instead, I saw a man standing there, silhouetted by the moonlight. He was tall and thin, wearing a dirty baseball cap and a tattered jacket. I rolled down the window just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Need some help?" the man replied, his voice raspy. "Yeah, my truck's busted. You got a phone or anything?" The man shook his head. "No phone, but there's a gas station a few miles back. I can give you a ride if you want." Something about him made me uneasy, but I didn't have many options. "All right," I said reluctantly. "Just let me grab my stuff." I climbed out of the truck, grabbing my flashlight and toolbox. The man watched me with an unsettling intensity. We walked over to his car, an old, beat-up sedan that looked like it had seen better days. I got in the passenger seat, and he started the engine. The interior was filthy, and the air reeked of stale cigarette smoke. We drove in silence for a while, the darkness of the desert enveloping us. I kept my hand on my flashlight, ready to use it if things went south. After about 10 minutes, I realized we weren't heading back toward Amarillo. The gas station should have been in the other direction. "Hey," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I think you're going the wrong way. The gas station's back that way." The man didn't respond. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong. "Listen, man, I appreciate the help, but I think I'll just walk back," I said, reaching for the door handle. Before I could pull it, the man locked the doors with a click that echoed through the car. "Stay put," he muttered. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned off the highway onto a dirt road. The car bumped and jostled as we drove further into the middle of nowhere. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. I could try to overpower him, but he was bigger and probably stronger. I could wait for an opportunity to escape, but who knew when that would come? Finally, the car came to a stop in front of a dilapidated cabin. The windows were boarded up, and the place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The man got out and walked around to my side, opening the door. "Out," he said, his voice cold. I hesitated, then stepped out of the car, keeping my flashlight close. "What is this place?" I asked, trying to stall for time. "Shut up and move," he growled, shoving me toward the cabin. Inside, the place was even worse. The floor was covered in dust and debris, and the air was thick with the smell of rot. The man pushed me into a corner and tied my hands behind my back with a piece of rope he pulled from his jacket. My mind was racing, trying to figure out a way out of this. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to a table and picked up a rusty knife. My blood ran cold as he approached me, the blade glinting in the dim light. I knew I had to do something, and fast. "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I've got money. I can give you whatever you want." The man smirked, the first sign of any emotion I'd seen from him. "It's not about money," he said quietly. "It's about making you suffer." Before I could react, he lunged at me, the knife slashing through the air. I managed to twist to the side, the blade cutting into my arm instead of my chest. Pain shot through me, but I didn't have time to think about it. I kicked out with my legs, knocking the man off balance. He stumbled back, giving me a moment to act. I struggled to my feet, my hands still bound behind me. I ran for the door, but he was on me in an instant, tackling me to the ground. We grappled, the knife inches from my face. I could feel his hot breath on my skin, the smell of sweat and tobacco overwhelming. With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to roll us over, pinning him beneath me. I brought my head down hard, smashing it into his nose. He grunted in pain, and I felt his grip on the knife loosen. I wrenched it from his hand and plunged it into his chest. He let out a strangled cry, then went limp. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. Blood was everywhere, and the reality of what I had just done hit me like a freight train. I had to get out of there. I ran out of the cabin, my hands still bound, and made my way back to the car. I fumbled with the keys, finally managing to unlock the doors. I drove as fast as I could, not daring to look back. I made it to a gas station just outside of Amarillo, my arm throbbing from the wound. I stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor. The attendant called the police, and within minutes, I was surrounded by flashing lights and sirens. They cut the rope from my wrists and bandaged my arm before taking my statement. The man I killed was identified as Daniel Parker, a drifter with a long history of violence. He had been linked to several disappearances in the area, and it was clear that I was supposed to be his next victim. The police found the cabin, and inside, they discovered evidence of his other crimes: clothes, personal items, and even a few bones. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the experience haunted me. I left trucking a few months later, unable to shake the memories of that night. I moved to a small town in Oregon, far from the highways and the nightmares that plagued me. I never forgot Daniel Parker or the fear I felt in that cabin. Life goes on, they say, but some scars never fully heal. I'm grateful to be alive, but every now and then I wake up in a cold sweat. The memory of his cold eyes staring into mine. It's a part of me now. A dark chapter in my life that I can't erase. When you spend enough time alone, the silence becomes something else. It's no longer a backdrop, but a living, breathing thing that creeps in around the edges of your thoughts. I thought I liked the silence. That's why I had been living on the road for months, with no one but myself and my RV for company. But this trip to Ocala National Forest was supposed to be different. I needed to reset to get my head straight. I guess that's what they all say before they lose it. The first day was easy enough. I set up camp on the edge of the forest, not far from one of the swamps that ran through Ocala. I had picked this spot on purpose, far enough from the touristy campgrounds, but close enough to the water to take some good photos. Photography had become my new hobby, something to fill the long stretches of time, something to keep my mind off Rachel. The forest was thick with towering pines and oaks, their branches twisting and closing in overhead. The light filtered through the leaves in a way that made the air seem heavy, almost suffocating, but it was peaceful, or at least I told myself it was. I parked the RV near a clearing, right where the swamp met the woods. The ground was firm enough, and I didn't think much of the water nearby. I had no reason to worry, not yet. By the time I finished setting up, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows that stretched across the clearing. The air was unnervingly still, like the whole forest was holding its breath, but I didn't mind. Solitude was the whole point. I sat outside for a while, watching the last of the light fade before retreating inside the RV. The hum of the small generator I had hooked up was the only sound breaking the silence. Everything seemed fine. Everything was fine until the light started flickering. It was subtle at first, just a dimming of the overhead lights. I figured the wiring was faulty, nothing I couldn't fix. I'm a mechanic by trade, after all. I ignored it, settling in with a book, trying to lose myself in the words. But then, the flickering got worse. The lights flashed on and off in rapid succession. The shadows in the RV danced wildly before everything went dark. I sighed, more frustrated than anything, and grabbed my flashlight. After a few minutes of fumbling with the wires, I got the power back on. The lights stabilized, but there was something else. A soft, buzzing noise, faint just at the edge of hearing, like a distant hum. It might have been the swamp, maybe bugs, or just the generator straining, but it set me on edge. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, the unease I'd felt the night before was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. The sunlight was warm, and the swamp shimmered in the early light. I grabbed my camera and set out for a walk, like looking for something worth capturing. Ocala was known for its beauty, the kind of untouched wilderness that's hard to find these days. But the deeper I walked into the woods, the more I realized something was off. It started small, little things I could have easily ignored. My compass acting up, the needle spinning lazily before settling in the wrong direction. The buzzing sound from the night before returned, louder now, seeming to come from all around me. I chalked it up to the swamp mosquitoes, maybe, or some malfunction with the generator still ringing in my ears. But when I came back to camp, I noticed the first real sign that something wasn't right. My gear, things I'd left on the picnic table outside, was scattered across the ground, not in a way that suggested wind either. The table had been cleared. My flashlight, the lantern, the tools I'd left out, all of them were scattered in a perfect line toward the swamp. I stopped, staring at the items. Someone had been here, or something. I'm not easily spooked, but my gut told me to get back inside, lock the doors. That night, I sat in the RV, every light on, clutching a lantern just in case the power flickered again. I told myself it was fine. Probably some animal. Bears get curious, right? But when the tapping started, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was soft at first, just a light tapping on the window, like something brushing against it. I glanced over but didn't see anything. I convinced myself it was the wind, the branches moving in the breeze. But then the tapping came again and again. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door, stepping out into the cold night air. The swamp smelled foul, like rot and decay, and the buzzing sound was back, louder than ever. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the clearing, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Large, human-like prints, leading right up to the window of my RV. The mud was fresh, still wet from the swamp, and the prints were clear, but there were no other signs of anyone around, no trails leading away, just those prints stopping right at the window. Then, nothing. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to believe it was someone playing a prank, some camper messing with me, but I hadn't seen another soul since I got here. No cars at the trailhead, no signs of other campers nearby. I hurried back inside, locking the door, but I knew it wouldn't help. The feeling in my gut told me I was being watched. By the third day, I wanted out. I'd seen enough, but when I tried to start the RV, nothing happened. The engine clicked, but wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, but the RV refused to start. Panic settled in. My phone had no signal, this deep in the forest, and the nearest ranger station was miles away. The buzzing sound was louder now, constant, like a low hum in the back of my skull. I packed a bag and decided to hike out. Staying another night was out of the question. The trail was familiar enough, but something was different. The air was thick, stifling, and the swamp seemed to have crept closer. I hadn't noticed it before, but the water was rising, soaking the ground around my campsite. The once dried trail was now a muddy mess, slowing me down as I tried to navigate through the trees. And then I saw them. At first, they were just shadows moving between the trees, barely visible in the corner of my eye. I stopped trying to focus, but every time I turned to look, they were gone. My heart raced. I pushed forward faster now, but the shadows followed me. They stayed just out of sight, flickering in and out of existence like ghosts. By the time I reached the halfway point, the whispers started. It wasn't loud, just a faint, distant murmur, but it was unmistakable. Voices speaking in a language I didn't understand, too quiet to make out the words. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing, just the trees, the swamp, and those damn shadows. The trail blurred before my eyes, and I stumbled, my head swimming. I couldn't think straight. The buzzing, the whispers, it was too much. I needed to get out of here, but no matter which way I turned, the trail led me back to the swamp. It was like the forest was folding in on itself, trapping me in a maze of water and trees. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, and then I saw them. Standing at the edge of the swamp, barely visible in the twilight, were the figures. They were tall, too tall to be human, with elongated limbs and dark faces. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching me, their forms flickering in and out of the shadows, like something half-formed, not fully real. I backed away, my heart pounding, but they didn't follow. They didn't need to. The buzzing sound grew louder, the whispers more insistent. I turned and ran, not caring where the trail led. I just needed to get away. When I finally collapsed back at the RV, drenched in sweat and mud, the sun was already setting. The swamp had crept even closer, the water now lapping at the edges of the clearing. I locked myself inside, every light on, but it didn't matter. I could still hear them. The whispers, the tapping, the buzzing. It all grew louder, closing in on me from every side. I knew what was out there. I'd seen it, and it was only a matter of time before it got in. I sat there in the dark, clutching the flashlight, waiting for the moment when the door would creak open, waiting for the shadows to finally step into the light. I don't know how long I sat there, hours, days. The buzzing is in my head now, a constant hum I can't escape. The figures are closer. I can see them outside, just beyond the trees. Their eyes are glowing in the darkness. They're waiting for me, and I'm not sure how much longer I can resist. My name is Corbin Walker, and in 1999, on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, I spent an entire afternoon trying to patch a busted water pump behind my uncle's old house, thinking I should probably learn a decent trade before my back got any worse and my sense of humor turned stale like last week's fry bread. I remember the morning heat hanging over the empty fields, the kind of heat that settles into your bones and makes every chore feel heavier. I tried tightening a bolt until my knuckles throbbed, then stepped back to look across the land. A few cottonwood trees framed the horizon, and beyond them, low hills rolled into dry grasslands dotted with scraggly shrubs. From where I stood, everything seemed quiet. just the distant rattle of a pickup on a dirt road and a breeze stirring dust along the fence lines. I stretched my stiff shoulders, thinking how I wasn't getting any younger. I had no proper education, no significant savings, and a knack for fixing nothing but leaky faucets and rusted hinges. Still, I figured life would roll on as it always had, slow, steady, uneventful. Around midday, I decided to walk out to check on some horses my cousin Owen kept near the far edge of the property. Owen trusted me to look after them whenever he got tied up elsewhere. I wanted to make sure one that had recently cut its leg wasn't getting infected. I didn't own a gun, most folks around here did, but I always ended up spending my money on practical things like tools and cheap jokes. I used to say I was about as prepared for trouble as a cactus is for a flood. It was one of those lines nobody found funny except me. As I headed across the flat stretch, I noticed a strange hush. No birdsong, no distant barking of dogs. My steps scraped on loose gravel, and I coughed a little from the dust. The horses usually wandered near a shallow watering hole, just a puddle this time of year. I reached the spot to find the horses milling nervously, eyes wide as if something had spooked them. One mare snorted, ears twitching, and the others bunched up as if trying to present a united front against an unseen threat. I took a step closer, scanning the ground. Tracks, fresh and odd, cut through the dirt near the edge of the puddle. They were elongated, claw-tipped, like those of some overgrown bobcat that had decided it wanted a pair of boots to go with its dinner. I knelt down, ran my fingertips lightly along the marks. The horses shifted behind me, restless. I stood, feeling uneasy. Perhaps a predator had wandered in looking for a meal. Coyotes and mountain lions sometimes ventured near, but these prints looked wrong. The spacing, the depth, too heavy, too deliberate. I cracked a weak joke to myself, something about how I discovered the world's first gym-going bobcat that skipped leg day. It made me smile nervously. Then I heard a scream. I sprinted back toward the house, heart pounding. The scream had come from the direction of my uncle's place. As I rounded the corner near the old picket fence, I saw my friend Quentin stumbling out of the workshop behind the house, clutching his forearm. Blood dripped between his fingers. He didn't cry out again, but the horror in his face said it all. I rushed over, snatching a rag from my pocket to press on the wound. "What happened?" I asked, voice low. He just shook his head, eyes darting back toward the workshop's open door. Inside that workshop, where I'd stacked planks of lumber and hung old tools, I caught a glimpse of something moving behind a half-finished shelf. It hissed, low and sharp. No words, just a sound that meant business. I eased forward, adrenaline pumping, afraid but curious. In that dim light, I saw it. Tall as a large dog, but built more like a lean lynx, muscles strung tight under mangy black fur. Its head was elongated, ears tufted, and its teeth, too many, too long, curved inward like hooks. Its eyes were dark, reflecting the dull light. It reminded me of a wolverine that had decided to bulk up and take sides. Its tail flicked, once, twice, then it charged. I slammed the door and leaned against it, yelling for Quentin to run. My cousin Owen sprinted toward us from behind the main house, rifle cradled in his arms. He must have heard Quentin scream and come running. "Open it," Owen said, voice tight. "We can't let it roam free." I hesitated. Quentin groaned, pressing his wounded arm. The thing inside scratched at the wood, testing for weakness. I swallowed hard and stepped aside. Owen kicked the door open and fired a shot. Wood chips flew. The creature darted between shelves. Another shot rang out. Missed. The beast lunged forward, batting at Owen's rifle and sending it clattering to the floor. I yelled something incoherent and threw the rag I'd used on Quentin's arm, as if that would help. It didn't. The creature pounced, knocking Owen against the wall. The smell of sweat and blood hung heavy in the enclosed space. Quentin yelled, "We have to get it out of there." I felt useless, standing empty-handed, heart pounding like a drum. I snatched a broken hoe handle leaning near the door and jabbed it forward. The creature spun, jaws snapping, and tore into Quentin, who had tried to crawl toward Owen's rifle. Quentin cried out once, then fell still, his eyes open and glazed. I backed away, furious and terrified. Owen, dazed but alive, scrambled toward the rifle again. The creature lowered itself, ready to spring. Owen managed to get his hand on the gun's stock. Before he could raise it, the creature hurled forward, claws ripping through the fabric of Owen's jacket and into his chest. Owen gasped, and the rifle fired once, shooting into the ceiling. Dust and debris rained down. The creature bit deep, shaking its head. I shouted, "Hey!" as if my voice could matter. I lurched forward with the hoe handle, aiming for its neck. The blow landed, not hard enough. The creature turned its head, teeth glistening with blood. I felt my stomach tighten. I tried humor again, a desperate reaction. So much for a peaceful afternoon. It didn't laugh. It rushed me. I tripped backward, elbow striking the floor, pain shooting up my arm. I rolled, scrambling to the door, heart hammering. I needed a weapon, better than a stick. Outside, the dust had settled under a dull sky. I rushed to my uncle's truck, the old Chevy parked under a lean-to. The keys dangled in the ignition. Owen often kept a hunting knife in the glove box. I yanked it open, empty, except for a single candy bar and an old photograph of him and Quentin laughing over a broken engine block. I cursed under my breath, slammed the door, and scanned the yard. My uncle's tools were scattered. A shovel, a hammer, a crowbar. Nothing that guaranteed victory. Then I heard scratching at the doorway. The creature slipped out, low to the ground, body tense with grim purpose. Across the yard, I saw my neighbor Wapasha creeping forward with his hunting rifle, face grim. I gestured wildly, pointing at the beast. He took aim, fired once, missed. The creature bolted toward him. Wapasha fired again, winged it in the side. It howled, high and sharp, but kept coming. Wapasha tried to bolt. Too late. The beast leapt onto him, clawing at his throat. He dropped like a sack of grain, rifle skittering away. I ran for the rifle, heart in my throat. As I reached it, the creature turned to me, blood darkening its fur. We locked eyes, and I muttered a line so absurd I can't believe I said it. You know, I'm not exactly a five-star meal, more of a drive-through snack. It crouched, tense. I raised the rifle, hands shaking. The beast moved first. I squeezed the trigger. The shot thundered, and the creature fell. Bruised but breathing, we survived. Bruised but breathing, at the end of that day, I stood outside again, rifle cradled in my arms. Dust settled over the land, and I took a long breath. I had no wisecrack, no joke. I only knew that I'd remember. Remember that one desperate day, that single terrible struggle with a predator no one had ever named. We had faced it, ended it, and proven ourselves capable of holding our ground. There was no mystery left to ponder, only a lesson. Sometimes the world holds creatures beyond our understanding, and whether they come from hungry desperation or twisted origins, we must meet them with all the courage we can gather. I should have known better than to trust an unmarked road. After years of travel writing, you'd think I'd have a sharper instinct for bad decisions. But there I was, driving deeper in Indigford Pinchau National Forest, chasing a forgotten trail that was supposed to lead me to a ghost town no one could find anymore. Vanished off the map. The ranger at the visitor center had said with a grin, "People go looking for it and never see it again. It's like the road just swallows you up." He laughed, but I could see the glint in his eye. He loved spinning those kinds of tales for tourists. But I wasn't a tourist. I was a writer, damn it. I had an assignment to finish, and there was no room for ghost stories. I followed the narrow, crumbling logging road as it wound deeper into the trees. My RV rattled along, tires crunching over fallen branches and loose gravel. The road narrowed, barely wide enough for my rig, but I kept going. I'd done my research, and this was the right way, even if the forest seemed determined to reclaim the path. It had been a long day, and I was eager to set up camp and relax before exploring the area the next morning. The further I went, the thicker the trees grew, their branches knitting together overhead, blotting out the late afternoon sun. My GPS had long since lost signal, but I didn't need it. I was prepared. I had maps. I was confident I didn't get lost easily. But as I rounded the last bend in the road, something changed. The sky had been clear earlier, but a dense fog was rolling in now, thick and fast. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road, which had been clear just moments ago, seemed to dissolve into a gray blur. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. Just up ahead, a small clearing appeared through the mist. It wasn't much, but it was enough room for me to park the RV. I didn't have many other options. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The fog clung to everything, making the air feel damp and cold. It shouldn't have been this cold, not in early fall. The chill crept into my bones, but I pushed it aside and started setting up camp. Something about the silence gnawed at me, though. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness in that damned fog. I finished my setup quickly, then retreated to the warmth of the RV. I wasn't nervous, but the quiet was getting under my skin. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into the driver's seat, and pulled out my maps. I spread them across the dash, looking for my next move. The ghost town was supposed to be less than a mile away, hidden deep in the woods, down a trail that was barely marked. Tomorrow, I'd hike to it, get my pictures, take some notes, and be done with it. Easy. But something was off. The road I'd driven on wasn't showing up on the map anymore. I traced the route with my finger, confused. The road was here. I'd just come down it, but now on the map, it wasn't anywhere to be found. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield at the fog-shrouded forest. The ranger's words echoed in my mind. Vanished off the map. I laughed softly to myself. It was a joke, a tall tale to scare off amateur hikers, nothing more. Still, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I felt it again, that unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, curling around the RV like tendrils. I looked back toward the road I'd driven in on, but it wasn't there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stepped forward, peering into the mist. No road, just an unbroken line of trees. My stomach tightened. I walked a few more steps, hoping the road would reappear, but it didn't. The forest was dense, the trees close together. There was no sign of the path I had taken just hours earlier. It was as if it had been swallowed whole. I jogged back to the RV, heart racing now. I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to where the road should have been, sweeping the beam through the fog, but all I could see were trees, tall, dark, and oppressive. My breath fogged the air in front of me as I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The road couldn't just vanish. I hadn't gotten lost. I couldn't have. But when I turned back toward the RV, I felt it. That creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight around, heart pounding, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the trees. Hello? My voice cracked. I regretted speaking as soon as the word left my mouth. The fog swallowed my voice, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing. I backed toward the RV, my nerves on edge, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to let a little fog and a missing road freak me out, but something felt wrong. The rational part of my brain was trying to make sense of it. Fog could play tricks on your eyes, and maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. That was all. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. I spent the next hour pacing the length of the RV, checking and rechecking my maps, trying to retrace my route in my head. Nothing made sense. The road had been there. I hadn't imagined it. By nightfall, the fog had thickened to the point where I couldn't see more than a few feet outside. The temperature had dropped even more, and I cranked up the RV's heater, wrapping myself in blankets. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, soft thuds like footsteps outside, and whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. It had to be the fog, I told myself. It was distorting sound, making me paranoid. But when I woke in the middle of the night, there were voices. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear them, faint, murmuring voices coming from outside. I crawled to the front of the RV, heart hammering, and peered through the windshield. The figures were back. This time there were more of them. Shadows in the fog, standing still, watching. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me. Cold, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. I scrambled to turn on the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power. The RV was silent, cold, and dark. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, but the beam barely cut through the fog. I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but my heart was racing, my mind spiraling into panic. The road was gone, the figures were back, and now I was trapped here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and burst out of the RV. The cold hit me like a slab. I marched toward where the road had been, determined to find it, but the forest had shifted. The trees were closer now, the fog denser. I walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape stayed the same. It was as if I was walking in circles. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back at the RV. I could hear the voices again, closer now. They echoed through the fog, indistinct and ghostly. My flashlight flickered and the shadows appeared again, closer this time. standing just beyond the beam of light. I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. The figures were out there, circling me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadows loomed outside. Never coming closer, but never leaving. Morning came, though I could barely tell. The fog hadn't lifted, and the road was still gone. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I turned the RV around, driving slowly back the way I had come. If the road was there, I couldn't see it. All I could do was follow the same path I'd taken before, hoping it would lead me out. But it didn't. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, a straight line through the fog, leading nowhere. And as I drove, I realized with sinking dread that I was still trapped. The road hadn't taken me anywhere. I was driving in circles, and the figures were still there, watching, waiting. They had me now. The vanishing road wasn't just a story, it was real, and I wasn't getting out. I never thought something like this would happen to me. I'm the type of person who always takes precautions, trusts my gut, and stays aware of my surroundings. But no amount of preparation could have prepared me for what happened that night in Lake Arrowhead, California. I had been living in my RV for about a year at the time. I wasn't doing anything extravagant, just working remotely, traveling around the West Coast, and enjoying the freedom that comes with living on the road. I had stayed in a lot of campgrounds, some more populated and some isolated. I love the peace of being out in nature, especially when I can park away from other campers. This particular night, I parked in a quieter spot near the woods, away from the main road. It was late October, so most of the summer tourists had already left, and the campground was almost empty. There were a couple of RVs a little further down, but nothing too close. I had the whole night to myself, and that's exactly how I liked it. Around 9 p.m., I made dinner, sat down to watch a show on my laptop, and settled in. The windows were closed, and the inside of the RV was warm, the small lamp on the table casting a soft glow over everything. Everything felt calm and safe. But then, around 11 p.m., I heard the knock. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. It was soft, almost tentative, like someone didn't want to disturb the peace too much. But then it came again. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't seen a soul for hours. And this late at night, who would be knocking on my door in the middle of nowhere? I cautiously got up and went to the small peephole in the door, but it was too dark outside to see anything. I could make out shapes moving outside, but nothing specific. I felt that prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind you get when something isn't right, but I tried to shake it off. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking a little. A man's voice responded almost immediately. "Hey, sorry to bother you. My car broke down just up the road. Can I use your phone to call for help?" I was confused. There were a few other RVs around, and if his car had really broken down, why hadn't he gone to one of them? It didn't make sense. "Where's your car?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Just a little ways up the road," he answered. "I didn't see anyone else around, and I was hoping I could just use your phone." I didn't buy it. I knew there were at least 2 other RVs not far from me, and there were other campers on the main road. Why come all the way to me, especially at this hour? The more I thought about it, the more something felt wrong. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should try the other RVs. They might be awake." There was a long pause, too long. I could hear the man shifting outside, his footsteps moving back and forth. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. "Are you sure? I really don't want to be out here much longer. It's freezing, and I could really use a hand." A sudden urge hit me, to lock the door, to grab something to defend myself, but I didn't want to overreact. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, I'm just trying to relax tonight. Please leave." I thought that would be the end of it. But then the situation turned worse, much worse. I heard him step closer to the door, his voice now lower and more insistent. "You're not being very friendly. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." My heart slammed in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to do something. Anything. I stepped back from the door, keeping my eyes on the handle. I could see the shadow of him through the small window, pacing back and forth. "Listen," I said, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "I've already told you I can't help. Please just go." And then the door handle started rattling. My blood ran cold. He was trying to open it. My RV is old, but I made sure to lock it when I got inside, especially at night. But hearing the handle turn, feeling the slight jolt as he tried to force his way in, it terrified me. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I couldn't think straight. I didn't know if I should call the cops or try to confront him. I knew that if he got in, I wouldn't be able to handle him on my own. Before I could make up my mind, there was a loud thud against the door. I jumped back, the sound reverberating through the thin walls of the RV. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't leaving. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was something. I tried to steady my breath, but then the door suddenly flew open. He wasn't just trying to open it, he had forced his way in. He pushed through the door so hard that it slammed into the wall behind it. And then, there he was, standing in front of me. I was frozen for a moment. He was tall, probably around 6'2" or 6'3", wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. His face was partially obscured by the hood, but I could make out a couple of tattoos on his neck. His eyes were wide, almost wild. I didn't even think. I just reacted. I swung the flashlight as hard as I could, connecting with his shoulder. He grunted, stumbling back, but he didn't fall. He grabbed my wrist with one hand, trying to yank the flashlight away from me. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I just knew I had to get away from him. I kicked, trying to break free, but he was stronger. His grip tightened on my arm, and I felt panic rise in my chest. That's when I saw it. A small kitchen knife on the counter, just a few feet away. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it, my hand trembling, and with all the force I could muster, I stabbed toward his chest. I don't know if it hit him, but it was enough to make him pull back. He cursed under his breath and backed toward the door, looking almost surprised that I'd fought back. I wasn't waiting for him to think it over. I slammed the door shut as hard as I could and locked it. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone, dialing 911. I didn't even know if he was still out there, but I wasn't taking any chances. The cops arrived within 20 minutes, but by then, the man was gone. They found a few footprints in the dirt outside. That was it. No sign of him. I ended up leaving the campground the next morning. I didn't feel safe there anymore, and I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe staying alone in an RV again. Every time I think about it, my heart races. I keep wondering, what would have happened if I hadn't fought back? I don't know if this guy was just some random creep or if he had other plans, but I can tell you one thing. I'll never take my safety for granted again. To anyone out there who camps or travels alone, please be cautious. There's always someone out there watching, waiting for an opportunity. And when that opportunity comes, it's up to you to make sure you're ready. I thought a week alone in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest would be the perfect way to clear my head after everything that had happened. The divorce, leaving the military, and that nagging feeling I'd wasted years of my life. I figured some isolation would help me reset. So I packed up my RV, grabbed my gear, and drove deep into the heart of the forest. I should have known better when I first pulled into the campsite. I felt that familiar sense of calm I used to get on deployment, a kind of satisfaction that comes with being prepared for whatever the wilderness might throw at me. The Apache Sitgreaves is a vast, rugged place, and this far in, you don't see many other campers. That's why I picked it. No people, no distractions. Just the forest, my RV, and my thoughts. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV at the edge of a tree line overlooking a deep ravine. The view was incredible. The trees spread out like a sea of green, with the sun dipping low, casting long shadows over the land. I spent the first day hiking, snapping a few photos of the landscape and trying to relax. By nightfall, the temperature dropped sharply, but I welcomed the cold. It felt like the world was trying to numb me, erase the pain I'd been carrying since Rachel left. I lit a small fire, sat by it, and let the quiet settle in. That's what I wanted after all, but the silence felt different out here. It wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. The first night passed uneventfully, But something woke me around 3 a.m. I sat bolt upright, listening. There it was again, a sound just outside the RV. It wasn't the usual rustle of wildlife or the distant call of an owl. No, this was different. Slow, deliberate footsteps. At first, I thought maybe another camper had wandered into my area, but when I peered through the window, all I saw was blackness, the dense trees illuminated only by the faint moonlight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold air hit me immediately, sharp and biting. I swept the beam of light across the campsite, scanning the edges of the trees. The footsteps had stopped. Nothing moved. The fire had long since died out, leaving behind only a few glowing embers. No signs of anyone. I convinced myself it was probably just an animal and went back inside, locking the door behind me. But even as I lay back down, the hairs on the back of my neck stayed up, like I wasn't alone. By the second day, I was already starting to feel the isolation. The weather was turning colder than I'd expected, and to make matters worse, the RV's heater was acting up. It kept cutting out, leaving the inside freezing. At night, I spent hours trying to figure out what was wrong, but it was no use. I'd have to tough it out. I hiked out again that afternoon, looking for some distraction. The forest was beautiful, but in an unforgiving way. The trails were rough, and after a while, I veered off the main path looking for more secluded spots to explore. I told myself it was for the photography, but really, I just wanted to be somewhere no one could find me. That's when I first saw the carvings. At first, I didn't even notice them. They were subtle, old, just faint marks on the trees. I stopped to take a break and caught sight of one right in front of me. A series of lines etched into the bark, almost like a symbol. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the grooves. It wasn't natural. Someone or something had put it there. As I moved on, I found more of them, scattered and in no particular pattern, but close enough to make me uneasy. They circled the area where I'd set up camp, like some kind of boundary. I shook off the strange feeling gnawing at my gut. This forest was old. People had been here long before me, carving symbols and marks for reasons long forgotten. Nothing to worry about, but I didn't stop worrying. That night, I woke up again, the same time as before, 3 a.m. The footsteps were back, closer this time. The sound was unmistakable, soft, but deliberate, like someone walking slowly around the RV, testing the ground with each step. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps circled the RV, paused, then resumed. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for the flashlight, but hesitated. What if it wasn't a person? What if it was something else? The footsteps stopped. Dead silence. Then I heard the tapping. Soft, rhythmic taps on the windows. My mouth went dry. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The taps grew louder, more insistent, coming from all sides of the RV now. I forced myself to get up slowly and crept to the nearest window. My hands shook as I pulled the curtain back just a little. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness outside. Nothing, just the forest and the shadows. But when I looked again, I saw it. A handprint pressed against the glass, smudged and distorted like someone or something had leaned in close. The print was too large to be human. Its fingers were long, unnaturally so, and the palm had an odd, warped shape to it. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight, my heart hammering in my chest. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, but the tapping eventually stopped. The air felt thick, like it was pushing down on me, suffocating me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, gripping my hunting knife, waiting for the footsteps to return. By the third day, I was ready to leave. I packed my gear and decided to head out early. Whatever had been out there the night before, I didn't want to find out. But when I tried to start the RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, but nothing. Dead. The frustration boiled over into panic. I was stranded. I grabbed my map and decided I'd have to hike out to the nearest ranger station a few miles away. It wasn't ideal, but I couldn't stay here another night, not with whatever was out there. I set off down the trail, moving fast. The cold had seeped into my bones, but I pushed on, hoping to make it before dark. The forest felt different now, darker, heavier. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow hiding something just out of sight, and the feeling of being watched, it never went away. About halfway to the station, I heard it again, footsteps that weren't my own. I stopped, listening. My hand rested on the knife then I heard a voice. It came from behind me, soft and distant. I froze. My blood ran cold. "Liam, help me." The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was Rachel's voice, my ex-wife. But she wasn't here. She couldn't be here. I turned slowly, like scanning the trees. Nothing. Liam, her voice again, closer this time. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mind was playing tricks on me. I started walking again, faster this time, my eyes darting around, looking for any sign of movement. The voice followed me, calling my name over and over. I clenched my fists, trying to block it out, trying to focus on the trail. But then I saw it. Standing in the middle of the path, not 20 feet ahead. The figure was tall, too tall to be human. Its limbs were long and thin, draped in tattered rags that seemed to shift in the wind. Its face? There was no face. Just a void, a swirling mass of darkness where its features should have been. Its eyes, though, its eyes were glowing, bright yellow, like two embers burning in the night. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I fumbled for my knife, holding it out in front of me, though I knew it wouldn't do any good. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no sense to it. This thing wasn't human. It wasn't natural. The Watcher, something from old Apache legends, stories I'd heard long ago, was real, and it had found me. The thing took a step forward, and I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. I don't remember much of the run. It was a blur of trees and shadows, the forest closing in on me as I tore through the underbrush, branches clawing at my clothes. The Watcher's eyes burned into my back. Somehow, I made it to the ranger station. I don't know how, but when I stumbled into the clearing and saw the small building, I nearly collapsed in relief. I burst through the door, breathless and shaking. The ranger inside looked up, startled, but I couldn't form the words to explain what had happened. I didn't need to. When I finally caught my breath, I told him everything, the footsteps, the handprints, the thing in the forest. He didn't believe me, of course. Why would he? He checked my RV later, saw the scratches and the smudged handprint, but still shrugged it off. Probably just a bear, he said. But I know better. As I sit here now, writing this down, I can still feel it. The Watcher's eyes on me. It's waiting. Watching. And it'll follow me no matter where I go. Some things you can't outrun. I came to Red River Gorge to find peace. Or at least that's what I told myself. When you've lost everything, when your life's fallen apart, nature feels like the only refuge. The solitude, the silence, they're supposed to help you clear your mind, right? But if I'd known what waited for me in those woods, I might have stayed home. I parked my old Jeep at the trailhead, strapped on my pack, and set off. The first day was perfect. The crisp autumn air had the faint smell of wet leaves, and the colors, God, the colors were dazzling. I'm a photographer by trade now, trying to make a name for myself since leaving teaching. The leaves, in their fiery oranges and deep reds, made the perfect backdrop for my shots. It was the kind of beauty you could get lost in. I guess that's what I was hoping for. The trail was tough, though, harder than I expected. The steep climbs had my legs burning, and my pack felt heavier with every step. I could feel the camera bouncing against my back, reminding me why I was here. The plan was simple. A week alone in the wilderness, just me, my gear, and enough food to get by. No distractions, no people, no Rachel. I shook the thought out of my head and kept walking, focusing on the landscape instead. The river was nearby, its faint gurgle a common soundtrack to the crunch of leaves underfoot. By the time the sun started to dip, I was more exhausted than I should have been. My muscles ached from the unfamiliar terrain, and blisters had already formed on my heels. I set up camp by the river. I'd brought an old tent that had seen better days, but I figured it would hold up fine for a week. The stove, a clearance sale special, was already giving me trouble. The flame flickered weakly as if unsure of itself, and I ended up eating half-cooked noodles before giving up and settling into my sleeping bag. That first night, I didn't sleep well. At first, it was just the usual branches rustling, the wind whispering through the leaves. But around midnight, I heard something strange. It sounded like a voice, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the trees. I sat up, listening. It came again, too soft to make out words, but there was a rhythm to it, a cadence like speech. My heart began to pound. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe distant campers, but there had been no cars at the trailhead. I was alone out here. Still, I convinced myself it was as nothing and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next day was harder. The trail was steep, and my legs were sore from the day before. The scenery was still breathtaking, but the deeper I went into the gorge, the more oppressive it felt. The trees grew closer together, their branches blocking out the sun, casting long shadows that made the woods seem darker than they should have been. It was around midday when I first saw it. I was setting up a shot of a rocky outcrop, the kind of thing that might make a good feature for my portfolio, when I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It was that primal sensation, the one that tells you you're not alone. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, and there it was, just within the tree line, maybe 30 feet away. At first, I thought it was a person, someone tall and thin wearing a long tattered coat, but something was off. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease. "You're just seeing things," I muttered to myself. "It's nothing." But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, the whispers returned. They were louder this time, clearer. I could almost make out words, but they were garbled, like someone trying to speak underwater. I lay in my tent, wide-eyed and tense, listening. The sound wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to swirl around the camp, circling me. I grabbed my flashlight, zipped open the tent, and shined the beam into the woods. There was nothing, just the trees, the river, the empty night. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, closer. I wanted to call out, but my throat was dry, my mouth frozen. I was too scared to make a sound, as if acknowledging it would make it real. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the tent fully and stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap. My breath came in sharp, visible puffs as I scanned the darkness. Then I saw the footprints. They were large, human-shaped, and fresh, pressed into the damp earth around my tent. They hadn't been there before I went to bed. My heart raced as I knelt down to examine them. They circled my campsite as though someone or something had been watching me, walking around while I slept. Panic bubbled up in my chest. I backed away slowly, stumbling as I scrambled back into the tent and zipped it up as fast as I could. I huddled in my sleeping bag, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. The whispers continued, relentless until dawn. By the third day, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept, and every step felt like agony. My legs were leaden, my pack seemed twice as heavy, and my mind was unraveling. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart into overdrive. I wanted to leave, but I was too far in now. It would take me days to hike back out, and the thought of turning around filled me with a strange sense of dread. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like the gorge itself didn't want me to leave, like it was holding me here, drawing me deeper into its clutches. I kept walking, pushing through the exhaustion, trying to ignore the whispers that still echoed in my head. By midday, I found myself near the river again, at a small clearing. I decided to stop and rest, hoping the sight of the water might calm me. But as I sat there, staring at the rippling current, I saw something across the riverbank. The figure. It was standing on the opposite shore, half hidden by the trees. I could see it more clearly now. Tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long for its body. It wore tattered, grayish rags that fluttered in the breeze. But its face was a blur, a smudge of darkness that seemed to shift and warp as I stared at it. My pulse quickened, and my breath caught in my throat. I fumbled for my camera, desperate to capture proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I raised the lens, focused on the figure, and snapped the shutter. The moment I did, the figure flickered like static on an old TV. 1 second it was there, and the next it wasn't. Gone. I lowered the camera, my hands trembling. My gut told me to leave, to get the hell out of here, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, frozen by fear. The whispers returned, louder now, almost angry. They filled the air around me, a cacophony of voices speaking over each other too fast to understand. And then I felt it, a cold, sharp pressure on my shoulder, like fingers pressing into my skin. I screamed, scrambling to my feet and backing away from the riverbank. The coldness followed me, clinging to me like invisible hands, trying to pull me down. I ran blindly, recklessly, away from the water, away from the voices. I didn't stop until I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. The The whispers had faded, but the cold lingered, sinking deep into my bones. I was shaking, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what I just experienced. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat by my dying campfire, clutching my camera, my eyes darting nervously around the darkened woods. The whispers had returned, but they were softer now, distant. I knew I wasn't alone. The figure, the wraith, as I'd come to call it, was out there, watching me, waiting for me. I tried to rationalize it, but there was no denying the truth anymore. This wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light or the wind playing games with my mind. There was something in these woods, something ancient, something angry. On the 5th day, I decided to leave. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking with nervous energy. I didn't care how long it took. I had to get out of this place. But the gorge had other plans. As I made my way back toward the trailhead, the path seemed to shift beneath my feet. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find the way out. Every turn brought me back to the same spot, the same trees, the same stretch of river. It was like the forest was folding in on itself, trapping me in a maze of endless woods. And then I saw it again, the wraith. It stood in the distance, half hidden by the shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I raised my camera again, my only weapon, and snapped the shutter. The wraith flickered, its form distorting, but it didn't disappear. It moved toward me, slow and deliberate, its tattered clothes trailing behind it like smoke. The whispers grew louder, the air around me colder, thicker. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest. The wraith didn't stop. It came closer and closer until it stood just feet away from me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Its face, a swirling mass of darkness, hovered inches from mine. And then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream, it spoke, "You can't leave." When I woke up, I was lying on the riverbank, soaked to the bone. The wraith was gone, but the memory of its voice lingered in my mind, an echo that refused to fade. I don't know how I made it back to the trailhead. I don't remember the walk, the drive, or even packing up my gear. But I know one thing for certain. I'll never go back to Red River Gorge. Some places weren't meant to be explored. I bought the trailer last spring, secondhand from a guy who was moving to Florida. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough. That trailer was supposed to be my sanctuary. After the stress of the divorce and losing my job, I needed a break from everything. The thought of spending a few nights by myself, parked somewhere quiet, far from the chaos of my life, sounded like exactly what I needed. So, I headed to a place that had been calling to me ever since I'd heard about it, Lake Lanier. People talked about the lake in hushed tones around the campfire when I was younger. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed that entire towns had been drowned when they flooded the valley to create the lake in the 50s, cemeteries included. The dead, they said, were still down there, restless, under the water. I never paid much attention to the stories. Superstitious nonsense, I thought. But after everything I'd been through lately, the idea of driving to the lake and parking my trailer on a secluded shore was more appealing than ever. A fresh start, even if just for a few days. I found a spot at the edge of a small, isolated cove, far from any of the designated campgrounds or busy boat ramps. Just the quiet lap of water against the shore and the trees standing tall and silent. It was perfect, peaceful, exactly what I was looking for. I parked the trailer and set up camp, watching as the late afternoon sun shimmered on the surface of the lake. That first evening, I cracked open a beer and settled into my lawn chair, facing the water. The silence was deep and soothing, almost too quiet. I could barely hear the usual sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, birds singing, frogs croaking, just the faintest trickle of the water lapping against the shore. At first, it was comforting. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. But then, as dusk fell, the air started to feel heavy, as if something unseen had slipped into the space around me. I ignored it. Just nerves, I thought. I was stressed, burned out, and needed to relax. But even as the sun slipped below the horizon and the lake turned dark and still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, the first night, I heard the sound, a soft splash like someone wading through the shallows right outside my trailer. It was nearly midnight and the fire had long since died out. I was tucked inside the trailer, half asleep, when I heard it again, Splash, then silence. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. Probably a fish, I told myself, or some animal come down for a drink. But it wasn't. The splash came again, and this time it was louder, more deliberate, as if someone was walking through the water slowly. I crept to the window and peeked out, my breath catching in my throat. The moon was bright enough to light the water, and for a second I swore I saw a shape. Something dark, standing in the shallows just a few feet from shore. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, like a person, but the figure was strange. Its head was too low, like it was hunched over, and its limbs looked wrong. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I stood frozen, heart racing, as I stared out at the still water. Nothing, just the calm surface of the lake, as if nothing had been there at all. I didn't sleep much after that, tossing and turning, convinced it was just my imagination. I'd been through a lot lately. It was bound to mess with my head. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease. I spent the day fishing. Even though I didn't catch much, I kept telling myself I was just tired, that the isolation was getting to me. But then, when I walked back to the trailer in the late afternoon, I noticed something strange. Footprints, small barefoot prints in the mud, leading from the water's edge up toward my trailer. They were small, like a child's. I stared at them for a long time, trying to convince myself they were my own tracks from earlier. But I hadn't been barefoot, and they didn't look right. They crisscrossed each other, as if someone had wandered back and forth around and around before disappearing into the trees. I crouched down, running my fingers over the prints, a chill creeping up my spine. There was no one else out here, no one but me. I looked up at the lake, at the still, murky water. It seemed darker than before, as if the light couldn't quite reach beneath the surface. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light. Maybe an animal had left the prints, or maybe someone else had camped here before I arrived. But deep down I knew something was wrong. That night the footsteps returned. I had just turned off the lights and settled into bed when I heard it. The soft, wet squelch of footsteps moving slowly around the trailer. My heart began to race. I grabbed the flashlight and the small hunting knife I had brought with me, inching toward the door. The footsteps stopped, just outside. I flicked on the light and threw open the door, shining the beam of the flashlight out into the night. Nothing, just the trees, the water, and the faint rustle of wind. But I knew I'd heard it. I wasn't imagining things. I'd heard footsteps circling the trailer, bare footsteps like someone creeping through the mud. I locked the door and stayed up for hours, listening. But there was nothing else that night, just silence. By the next morning, my nerves were shot. I drove into town to grab supplies and shake off the tension. While waiting at a local diner for my food, I overheard some locals talking about the lake, about the old towns that had been submerged when the dam was built, and about the cemeteries that hadn't been fully relocated before the waters rose. "The dead don't rest easy out there," one of the older men said, his voice low. "You spend too much time by the lake at night, and you'll start hearing them. You'll hear them call your name, luring you down to the water." I felt the cold sweat trickle down my back. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, never had. But the way the man spoke, as if he'd seen something, felt something, unnerved me. I left the diner and drove back to the lake, more on edge than before. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the dread returned. It was stronger now, more insistent, like something in the air had shifted. I sat by the fire, staring at the lake, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The water, dark and still, seemed to be hiding something beneath its surface. And then I heard it. A voice. Faint, almost indistinguishable from the breeze, but there, whispering my name. "Rick." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I stared out at the water, the fire crackling behind me, and the voice came again, soft and distant. "Rick." It wasn't just the wind. It was real. I stood up, backing away from the shore, my pulse racing. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it toward the water, my hands trembling. That's when I saw them. Figures, dark, pale shapes just below the surface of the water. They were small, human-shaped, but their faces were twisted and distorted, like they were drowning but frozen in place. The water around them rippled slightly, as if they were trying to reach for me, but they stayed submerged, watching. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stared at the figures, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It wasn't possible. I was losing it. I had to be. I turned and bolted back to the trailer, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife I'd grabbed. The footsteps came again that night, louder, more insistent, and the voice kept calling my name. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I didn't care how irrational it seemed or how crazy the story would sound when I got back home. I wasn't staying another night by that cursed lake. I packed up the trailer and tried to start the truck. Dead. The battery was completely drained, even though I hadn't left anything running overnight. My hands shook as I tried again, but the engine wouldn't even turn over. It was as if the life had been sucked out of the vehicle. I was trapped. Panic surged through me as I tried to think. I could hike back to town, but it would take hours, and the thought of leaving the trailer and whatever safety it offered seemed like a death sentence. The water called to me. Louder now. The whispers coming more frequently. They wanted me in the lake. I grabbed a set of tools from the back of the trailer, hoping to get the engine working again. As I worked, I felt eyes on me. I could sense them. The figures standing just at the water's edge, waiting. The temperature dropped, the air growing thick and cold as I frantically tried to get the battery to respond. Finally, after what felt like hours, the engine roared to life. I didn't waste a second. I jumped into the truck, threw it into gear, and peeled out of the campsite, the trailer jerking behind me. As I drove away, I glanced into the rearview mirror. They were there, standing at the edge of the lake, their pale, distorted faces watching me as I sped off into the night. I never went back to Lake Lanier. I haven't told anyone about what I saw or what happened. But even now, months later, when I lie awake at night in my own bed, far from the lake, I can still hear it, the faint sound of whispers calling my name. The darkness of the Wa National Forest stretched before me like an endless abyss. The trees, as ancient as the land itself, rose tall and imposing, blocking any light that might escape from the stars. This was the kind of place I used to love, complete isolation, pure, untouched nature. I was there to study the behavior of some rare owl species and take a few nighttime photographs. At least, that was the plan. At first, everything was as expected. I'd parked my trailer in a remote part of the forest, far from tourist trails and campgrounds. The silence that surrounded the area was reassuring. I was used to this kind of environment and loved the challenge of being completely alone, immersed in nature. But that night, the silence felt different, thick, heavy. I finished setting up camp and prepared for a night of observation. The wind blew gently, and the leaves made that soft, soothing sound that always accompanied the beginning of a night in the forest. For some reason, though, I felt a slight sense of unease, as if something was watching me. I ignored it. I knew solitude could play tricks on the mind. I had always been a skeptic. I wasn't the type to fall for superstitions or local legends. I went into the trailer to adjust my equipment. I wanted to set up the cameras and recorders to capture sounds and images of the animals that, with luck, would appear around me. But the first sign that something was wrong came then. My cameras started malfunctioning. The display kept flickering and the images came out distorted, as if something was interfering with the sensors. I looked at the cameras, confused. They were charged, working perfectly before I left home. I tried again, but the problem persisted. I thought it might be magnetic interference, some kind of atmospheric anomaly that could happen in more remote areas. I decided to step outside and check my phone's GPS, but to my surprise, it had no signal. Okay, I thought. It's not the end of the world. I'm in a remote area. It might just be a matter of finding a higher spot to get a signal. But as the night went on, things really started to get strange. I was outside adjusting the camera lens when I heard the first sound, a low, guttural noise echoing between the trees. It was hard to tell what it was, something deep in the forest. It sounded distant, but it was enough to put me on alert. I knew all kinds of wild animal sounds, but this wasn't familiar. I swept the darkness with my flashlight, trying to locate the source of the sound. But all I saw was the faint glow of trees and the light reflecting off the leaves. The wind seemed to have stopped suddenly, leaving the forest completely still. There wasn't even the sound of insects or owls. Absolute silence. I took a deep breath, trying to ignore the growing feeling that something was wrong. I knew that sometimes nature could be like this. Predators could silence the environment, scaring off smaller animals. But even by predator standards, that silence was oppressive. I decided to head back to the trailer and wait until morning. Maybe it was just exhaustion talking, and the darkness made everything scarier than it really was. After all, I had spent the whole day exploring the place. I laid down on my bunk, trying to relax, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like a shadow. I couldn't shake it. Then I heard the sounds again. Footsteps. I knew the sound of animal footsteps well, but these were different. Heavy, long, with a deliberate drag. I got up slowly, my senses on high alert. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the door. Something was moving outside. With my heart racing, I carefully opened the trailer door, and the flashlight illuminated the ground around me. Claw marks. The ground was scratched as if something large had passed through. I stood still for a moment, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. It could have been a bear or a wolf, but the marks were deep, as if made by something strong enough to tear the bark off a tree with a single swipe. A slight pressure began building in my chest. I wasn't easily scared, but what was happening here was strange. Very strange. The next day, I drove to the nearest town. I needed fuel for the generator, and I also wanted to ask a local if they had seen any signs of bears or wolves in that part of the forest. I walked into a small grocery store and casually mentioned to the owner, an elderly man, about the marks and the strange silence from the night before. He suddenly grew serious. His dark eyes stared at me, and he said in a grave voice, "That's not a bear, son. That's the shadow of the Black Forest." Confused, I asked what he meant by that, and with a worried expression, he told the story of an ancient entity that wandered the forest on nights with a new moon. They say it feeds on travelers' fear, plays with them until it drags them into the darkness. No one who meets it comes back the same. He spoke of the shadow as something that couldn't be defeated, only avoided. I smiled a little, unnerved, thanked him, and returned to the trailer. Small-town superstitions, I thought. Maybe he just wanted to scare me, or perhaps he was exaggerating local legends. But deep down, something inside me felt uneasy. I decided to stay alert, but still rational. That night, the tension grew. The malfunctions with my equipment continued. The trailer's lights began flickering, the generator kept failing, and then I saw them. Shadows moving between the trees. Fast, but impossible to make out clearly. Something was out there. I stood up and walked to the window, flashlight pointed into the darkness, and that's when I saw it for the first time, the shadow. It was a tall, misshapen figure, almost humanoid, but its arms were long and grotesque, and its eyes glowed with a pale yellow light. It stood about 30 yards away, motionless between the trees. I felt my blood turn to ice. It was completely still, watching me. The silence returned, heavier than ever. I froze, unable to move for a few seconds. When I blinked, it was gone. My rational mind began to crumble. This couldn't be real. I must have been tired. My mind was probably creating these things. But at the same time, my body knew something dangerous was out there, something I couldn't explain. The following hours were a blur of frustrated attempts to fix the situation. I tried restarting the trailer, adjusting the systems, but everything failed. The light flickered and went out. The wind, which had been still earlier, began to blow fiercely. But instead of easing the tension, the wind carried whispers, distant voices as if the forest itself were trying to tell me something. But I couldn't understand. The shadow appeared again. This time, closer. Its eyes watching me from the edge of the flashlight's beam. It was getting closer, slowly, playing with me. Panic rose in my throat. It was surrounding me, feeding off my fear, just as the old man at the store had said. I tried to leave. I started the trailer's engine, but it died almost instantly. I had no choice but to face this thing. I grabbed an improvised torch and stepped outside, my hands trembling. I had no idea what to do, but I knew I had to try something. The shadow moved again, floating between the trees. My eyes couldn't focus on it for long, but I knew it was getting closer. It was as if it was wrapping me in its darkness, draining my sanity bit by bit. Then I remembered. The fear. It fed on fear. I needed to control it. I had to force my mind to work. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and tried to calm my breathing. The panic began to fade, slowly but surely. I opened my eyes, and it was there, standing just a few feet away. But something had changed. It stopped. My controlled breathing, my slowing heartbeat seemed to weaken it. The glow in its yellow eyes dimmed. I didn't know how, but it seemed to be working. With one last desperate attempt, I got back into the trailer and started the engine. It sputtered, choked, but then roared back to life. I hit the gas, the sound of the engine drowning out the whispers and the wind. In the rearview mirror, I saw the shadow slowly fading into the darkness. I left the forest that night without looking back. I didn't know what that thing was or how I had escaped, but I knew one thing: I would never return to that forest. The shadow of the Black Forest was real, and I was glad to still be alive to tell the tale. My name is Jamie Darnell, and this all went down in 2006 when I drove my battered RV through Kenneport, Maine, looking for some peace and quiet on my summer break from teaching 6th grade math in a small town school. I had saved for that RV for 2 years, and though it rattled like a loose shopping cart, I was proud of it. I'd glued old postcards above the kitchenette, pasted small seashells on the windowsills, and taped a photo of my dog Rusty, rest his lazy soul, on the dashboard. The engine made a noise like it wanted to quit every time I pressed the gas, but I was too determined to care. When I rolled into Kennebunkport, I found a small family-owned campground at the edge of a coastal inlet. The place looked cozy enough: a few fire pits, a small general store with a squeaky screen door, and the Atlantic breeze drifting in. I parked beside a scruffy pine tree and stepped out to stretch my legs. A couple in a newer camper waved hello. The wife introduced herself as Linda, and the husband was Dave. They seemed friendly, but I was more interested in getting my folding chair out and enjoying the sea air. As I settled in, I noticed a battered pickup truck creeping through the campground. The driver's window was down. A lean man with graying hair stared at each of us campers and turned before stepping on the gas. He didn't look like a staff member. No wave, no nod, just a hard look. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe he was a local who didn't love out-off-towners. I remember thinking that was the extent of it. I couldn't have been more wrong. That evening, I made small talk with Linda and Dave around a crackling fire. Dave was a truck driver who liked to fish. Linda was a retired nurse. We shared some hearty laughs about the joys of cheap lodging and the hazards of public restrooms. I felt at ease. Before heading back to my RV, I caught sight of the same battered truck from earlier, parked at the far edge of the lot. The man in the driver's seat was staring into the flames like he was measuring us. It made me a little uneasy, but I told myself it wasn't my problem. People are strange sometimes. Early the next morning, I woke to the patter of light rain and decided to walk down to the shore. The tide was out and the rocks were slick with algae. I spotted a cluster of old traps stacked near a weathered boathouse. The air smelled like salt and seaweed. I leaned over to snap a few pictures with my old digital camera. That's when I heard quiet footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I spun around to see that same lean man with graying hair. Now he wore a thick flannel shirt and a crusted bandage stuck out from his left sleeve. "Ah, morning," I said, trying not to sound startled. He scanned me up and down. "You here alone?" I was tempted to lie, but I said, "I've got some friends back at the campground." He nodded slowly. "Just watch out for the rocks." People slip and crack their heads open. Then he turned and walked away, boots splashing in the shallow tide. I noticed an odd limp in his step. I felt odd about the conversation. More than odd, I felt a sting of caution. But again, I tried to tell myself he was just a gruff local. I spent the day reading in my RV, playing solitaire on a rickety table, and occasionally chatting with Linda and Dave. That night, the clouds cleared. A breeze carried the scent of pine and salt water right through the open windows. At around 10, I heard a commotion outside. I jumped down from my RV, adrenaline pumping, and saw flashlights swinging in the darkness. Linda was yelling Dave's name near the tree line. I ran to her side. She was trembling, eyes darting everywhere. "Dave went to gather extra wood," she said, "but he's gone." I remember the battered pickup truck. I remember the man's dead-eyed stare. My mind leapt to the worst. Together, we followed the trail of footprints into a small patch of pine trees, searching with Linda's flashlight. After about 100 yards, we found Dave's baseball cap stained with something dark. I swallowed hard. We pressed on, calling his name, scanning every bush and trunk. Then Linda pointed the beam toward a clearing. I wished I'd never seen what was there. Dave was lying face down. I rushed over, knelt, and gently turned him. His eyes stared blankly. He wasn't breathing. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. Linda let out a cracked gasp. Then she crumpled onto her knees. I didn't see any bullet holes, but I saw blood on his shirt. There was no sign of the attacker, but I felt watched, like there was someone close by, hidden behind those dark pines. I told Linda we had to call the police. We scrambled back to the campground, hearts hammering like drums. She dialed 911 on her phone while I alerted the campground manager. The manager, Harold, was in his 70s and could barely stand straight from arthritis, but he grabbed a shotgun from behind the counter. "Nobody messes with my place," he muttered. He offered to go look for the killer, but I insisted we wait for the police. We huddled in Harold's cramped office until the authorities arrived. I tried to distract Linda by asking about her nursing career, but it was no use. She just kept repeating Dave's name. I rubbed my temples, trying to think how this could have happened. That battered pickup truck, the lean man with the limp, he was the only suspect in my head. I told the arriving officers everything I knew. They combed the area, found the footprints, and took Linda's statement. I expected them to tell us to leave it to them. Instead, an officer said quietly, "We've had a few incidents around here. Folks gone missing. This might be connected." Despite the danger, I couldn't bear to leave Linda alone in that half-empty campground. I parked my RV closer to her camper, so we were about 10 feet apart. An officer stayed on watch, patrolling the perimeter with a flashlight. The night felt endless. I couldn't sleep. My mind spun over Dave's sudden, brutal end. Around 3 a.m, I stepped outside for some air. I saw the policeman patrolling near the office. Then I noticed a figure lurking behind the bathhouse, hunched and still. It looked like that same man, tall, gaunt, graying hair. My heart pounded, and I crept back to Linda's camper. I knocked gently. She opened the door, eyes puffy from crying. "He's here," I whispered. She nodded, fear cutting her voice. We locked ourselves inside her camper, turning off the lights. Minutes stretched. I heard the officer's footsteps, then silence. Then I heard a metallic clang from outside, like a tool dropping on concrete. Next thing, a loud crash came from the policeman's direction. Linda gripped my arm. I cracked open the door to see what was happening. The flashlight lay on the ground, pointing at a jumble of crates. The policeman was nowhere in sight. My mouth went dry. I had no clue where the killer was. We stayed put, breath hitching. Eventually, we made a dash to my RV, thinking it might be better to drive away. But the second we stepped into the open, the lean man appeared from behind a cluster of picnic tables. He lunged at me with a hunting knife. Linda screamed. I stumbled backward, flailing my arms, managing to knock him off balance. His knife slashed at the air between us. He hissed under his breath, eyes flashing with some wild anger. There was no question in my mind. He intended to do to me what he'd done to Dave. Linda sprinted toward the office while I wrestled the man's wrist. He was strong despite his wiry frame. The blade grazed my forearm, stinging hot. I twisted my body, trying to pull him around. We stumbled on the gravel, kicking up dust. He drove a knee into my stomach. I doubled over, wheezing. My mind roared with panic, but I heard Linda yelling for help. The man tried to stab me again, but I rolled out of reach. I reached for a loose rock near my feet, swung it toward his head, and caught him across the ear. He staggered, kneeling, blinking in confusion. By then, Harold arrived with that shotgun, shouting, "Freeze!" His hands were shaking, but he leveled the weapon at the attacker. Lights flooded the campground as backup police cruisers rolled in. Officers rushed in, disarming the man and slamming him to the ground. I lay there, chest heaving, trying to catch my breath. Someone helped me up. Another officer found their colleague unconscious near the crates with a gash on his shoulder, but still breathing. They hauled the attacker into a squad car. I never learned his name, only that he'd lived in an abandoned shack by the water. The police told us he might have been involved in other crimes around the region. Linda was too numb to say much. She left Kennebunkport the next day after giving her statement. The campground felt desolate after that. I spent one more night in my RV, eyes peeled for any sound or movement. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I thanked Harold, packed my things, and quietly drove away. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I imagined that lean figure glaring after me, but I knew they had him in custody. That didn't stop my pulse from racing. I hear Linda went home to be with her family. The last I heard, she was doing her best to cope with her loss. As for me, I kept teaching math, but I never took that kind of trip alone again. Maybe I'm a little skittish now. Maybe I hold on to this memory more than I should, but I'm still here and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I don't know if I'll ever forget Dave's cap lying in the mud or the way his wife's voice cracked when she found him. Some things stay with you no matter how far you drive. You can cross every state line in the country, but you can't outrun certain memories. Sometimes the safest seeming places can hold the deepest horrors. All I know is I got out alive, and that's enough for me. My name is Dakota Harrington, and this happened back in 2012 at Lake Tacoma, right where Oklahoma meets the Texas border. While I was taking my beloved old RV out for a much-needed break from everything, I just turned 30, and I figured I deserved a bit of downtime after spending a decade fixing air conditioning units and scorching summers. My boss used to say I had the sunniest disposition he'd seen. But to be honest, I just like telling goofy jokes to keep folks smiling. That's probably why people don't expect me to travel alone. They assume I'm too social to roam the highways by myself. Well, I appreciate company, but I also enjoy my own thoughts. And that week, I decided to vanish into the wild for a spell. Lake Tuck's always called to me because it's got shimmering water and plenty of open space to park the RV near fishing spots. I love the sound of waves against the hull of a boat and the laughter of families pulling up catfish. It reminds me of summer trips with my folks. Even though my dad passed away years ago, the place still carries the warmth of my childhood. I parked near a quiet inlet on a Friday afternoon. A few folks were around, some families with kids running about, a middle-aged couple grilling burgers, and one or two folks like me who just wanted a quiet corner of the lake. I spent the first evening sipping a cheap soda, leaning against my RV, and trying to spot shooting stars. The sky was clear and the weather felt perfect. Mild breeze, no humidity biting at my neck. I thought about a conversation I'd had once with my old buddy Darnell, where he claimed he could see UFOs if he stared long enough. I chuckled at the memory, shook my head, and went inside my RV to doze off. Next morning, I woke early to fish from the pier. I was halfway through tying my lure when I heard a gentle mourning from behind me. This was Tucker, a fellow traveler who had parked his RV a bit upriver. He was wiry with a small tattoo of a hawk on his left forearm. He said he'd been on the road for a year after losing his job. We exchanged a few jokes, teased each other about who'd catch more fish, and settled into companionable silence. The first cast, my line got tangled. He roared with laughter, and I decided I liked him right then and there. Not long after, we noticed a man waiting along the shoreline, a good distance away. He wore tattered jeans and a black jacket, even though the sun was starting to heat things up. He had a gal face with deep-set eyes, and he kept scanning the water, then scanning our direction like he was looking for something. Tucker and I gave each other a quizzical glance, but we didn't say much. Lake Tucks was full of odd characters now and then, people drifting through, chasing catfish or chasing a bit of peace. Around noon, Tucker and I parted ways. I headed back to my RV to fix some lunch. I just pulled out a cold sandwich when I heard a commotion near the couple grilling burgers. A scream high and panicked echoed across the campground. I ran over and Tucker arrived from another direction at the same time. That same gaw-faced man was standing about 10 yards away from the grill, staring like he'd seen a ghost. The husband, a hefty, friendly-looking guy in a best dad ever t-shirt, was on the ground. At first, I couldn't tell what was wrong. Then I realized there was blood pooling under him. It made no sense. 1 second, they were probably flipping burgers. The next, he was clutching his ribs with wide, terrified eyes. The stranger in the black jacket bolted. I remember the wife screaming. He stabbed him. Tucker and I rushed over, but the man on the ground was hurt bad. He was coughing, eyes rolling back. I felt my stomach churn, but I held it together and pressed my hands on his wound to slow the bleeding. The wife was too shocked to do much besides call 911. Tucker sprinted off after the attacker, but he didn't come back for a while. I stayed there, pressing on that wound, my arms shaking, doing my best to keep the man alive. He mumbled something about "tell my kids," but I couldn't make sense of the rest. I tried to calm him, tried to keep him focused, but soon he stopped blinking. My ears started ringing. People talk about time slowing down in these moments, and they're right. It felt like minutes stretched into hours. All I could do was stare at my blood-stained hands. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late for that poor guy. The campground erupted in panic. Most folks started packing up immediately. Nobody wanted to linger with a killer on the loose. I stumbled back to my RV in a daze, noticing cops streaming into the area, sirens wailing. An officer took my statement, and that's when I realized Tucker was still missing. After a while, the sun dipped low and the camp took on a frantic energy. Hardly anyone was left, except for a few squad cars and a couple of determined fishermen who refused to cut their trip short. I decided to stay put, partly out of stubbornness and partly out of fear for Tucker's safety. As darkness fell, a pair of officers told me they hadn't caught the suspect. They suggested I lock my doors and stay vigilant. I tried to eat dinner, but ended up losing my appetite. My mind kept replaying the scene. That gaunt face, the stunned look on my husband's face, blood on my hands. I paced inside the RV for what felt like hours. Midnight came and went. I flicked on every exterior light I had, scanning the shadows from my window, feeling my heartbeat thud in my ears. The only comforting thought was that the police were circling the area. Sometime past midnight, I heard a knock on my RV door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My hands fumbled around for something. Anything to protect myself. I grabbed a tire iron and opened the door a crack. There stood Tucker, panting hard, sweat dripping off him, face pale as a sheet. He stumbled in without waiting for an invitation. He confessed he'd followed that killer partway down a trail near the water, but lost him in the thick undergrowth. Then, while searching, Tucker said he found something horrific behind a cluster of rocks. He discovered two people, probably hikers, dead. They looked like they'd been attacked the same way. Tucker was shaking as he described it. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. We realized we were dealing with a man more deranged than we'd initially thought. This wasn't a single random act. We called the police again to let them know about the new victims. The dispatcher said they'd send a team to search, but it might take time to reach that rocky area in the dark. Tucker and I just sat there in my cramped RV, listening to every rustle of wind, trying not to jump at every creak. I tried to lighten the mood by joking about how we'd probably never want to go fishing again after this, but neither of us could laugh. At some point, exhaustion took over. Tucker dozed off in the passenger seat, clutching a flashlight like it was a precious gem. I nearly fell asleep too, but a noise outside jolted me awake. A scrape along the RV's exterior. My heart hammered. I reached for the tire iron again, motioned for Tucker to get down, and peeked through the curtains. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then a silhouette drifted across my headlight beam. That black jacket, those hollow eyes. He was right outside. I whispered to Tucker, "He's here." And my voice wavered in a way I'd never heard before. We heard the man try the RV door, rattling it. Adrenaline shot through my veins. I shouted, "Go away! The cops are coming!" My mind raced, imagining what he might do next. Suddenly, glass shattered. He'd smashed the passenger window. Tucker yelped and scrambled back. The killer reached in, trying to unlock the door from the inside. I swung that tire iron hard, connecting with his arm. He let out a sharp hiss of pain, pulled back, and cursed. In that sliver of time, Tucker lunged forward and slammed the butt of the flashlight straight into the guy's jaw. The man staggered, but he didn't stop. He tried to drag Tucker halfway out the window. I grabbed Tucker's belt, yanked him back, and swung again. Amid the flailing arms, the killer dropped something, a small knife that clattered onto the RV floor. The tension in that second felt suffocating. The door gave way. He was halfway inside. I thought, we're dead if we don't fight. Tucker and I both started kicking and punching wildly. It was ugly, feral, and terrifying. We managed to knock him out of the door. He hit the ground with a thud, and I heard him groan in pain. For a moment, he lay there stunned. We were about to shut the door when he bolted to his feet and ran off into the darkness. I caught a glimpse of his expression in the RV's headlights. It was pure rage. like he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. My body shook and I struggled to breathe. Tucker and I piled into the driver's seat, started the engine, and took off, trying to reach the nearest police checkpoint. We found an officer's car not far up the main road. We flagged him down, and soon enough, a flood of police cruisers swarmed the area. By dawn, they'd apprehended the suspect. The relief felt overwhelming. I finally let my tired body collapse into a camp chair near the station set up by the ranger's office. I glanced at my blood-stained shirt and shaky hands, realizing how close we'd come to being just another pair of corpses in the brush. That's all behind me now, but I still think about that poor husband and those two hikers, and I wonder if I could have done more. Tucker and I kept in touch for a while, swapping occasional messages about safer, friendlier spots. I haven't been back to Lake Tacoma since. One of these days, maybe I'll try to fish there again without panicking at every noise. Right now, though, I'm just grateful to be breathing. I drove my RV home a day later, tired, haunted, but alive. I wish I had a neat final thought. Sometimes the best I can do is remind myself that I'm okay, and that's enough. My name is Sage Collier, and this happened to me back in 2003 in Mount Sterling, Kentucky. While I was passing through with my old RV, I'd never intended to spend more than a night there. I was on my way east from a cross-country drive, hoping to see some scenic routes and taste the local food. I'm a retired middle school PE teacher, and after saving up for a few decades, I bought an RV to travel the country. Folks say I'm easygoing. I joke around a lot. Maybe because I spent years breaking up dodgeball fights and handing out ice packs to dramatic fifth graders. Let's just say not much rattles me. But that week in Mount Sterling left me with memories I'd rather erase. It all started innocently. I rolled into a modest campground near a wide field, dotted with small houses. The caretaker was an older woman named Donna. She greeted me with a warm smile and warned me that the showers only had lukewarm water. I laughed and said I'd been living on peanut butter sandwiches and cold showers for days. She gave me a key to the bathroom and pointed out where to park. The site was flat, close to a row of scraggly trees that offered a bit of shade in the late afternoon. The first evening passed without much happening. I set up a small grill by the RV, cooked some burgers, and chatted with another traveler named Mike. Mike was a delivery driver from Ohio who claimed to be on a soul-arcing road trip. He was lean with a shaved head and more tattoos than I could count. He showed me a swirling rose ink on his arm, said it was from his wild days, but he didn't go into detail. We shared a few jokes, swapped tips on hidden tourist gems, and turned in early. The next morning, I grabbed a cheap breakfast from a local diner, fluffy biscuits, sausage gravy, and a cup of wheat coffee. It was a small place where you could hear the bacon sizzling in the back. A couple of police officers sat at the counter chatting about the high school basketball team. Mount Sterling felt friendly, maybe too friendly. The kind of place where everyone looks at you, trying to figure out if you're new or just passing by. I liked it, though. The slower pace had a certain charm. After breakfast, I decided to explore. A local told me about a trail outside town near an old farm that had been abandoned for decades. Supposedly, the path led to a scenic overlook. So I packed some water, locked up my RV, and hit the road in my worn sneakers. I passed rolling fields full of grazing horses, which is typical in that region. The day was warm, but not stifling. Everything smelled of fresh grass and damp earth. Halfway down a winding back road, I saw footprints in the mud. They were big, maybe a man's boots. I wondered if there were a few folks out hunting. Then I noticed something else. An old barn with boarded-up windows. I'm nosy by nature, so I wandered closer. There were tire tracks near the barn's entrance, fresh, deep ruts as though a heavy vehicle had come through. My gut told me to leave it alone, but I couldn't help inching forward. Inside, the barn smelled of damp hay and something sharper like stale gasoline. Shafts of sunlight lit up swirling dust mows. Rusted tools hung on the walls, a bent pitchfork, a battered shovel. I took a few steps. My shoe kicked something that rolled across the dirt floor. It was a flashlight cracked on one side, the batteries half spilled. A muffled thump startled me and I froze. I strained to listen, but heard only my own breathing. So I backed out and told myself it was none of my business. I tried to shrug it off and carried on toward the trail. About an hour later, while looking at a half-dried creek, I nearly stumbled over a crumpled jacket lying in the grass. The jacket was streaked with mud and something dark that I tried not to think about. It looked like dried blood. I nudged it with my foot and found the wallet inside. The ID belonged to a man named Jeff Parsons. The photo showed a bearded guy with glasses, mid-30s. I'd never seen him, and I had no idea why his jacket was in that spot. My stomach churned. Suddenly, that barn felt like more than a curiosity. I hiked back to town, found the local police station, and handed over the wallet. The officer at the desk frowned. He said Jeff Parsons had been missing for a couple of days. He asked where I found it, scribbled notes, and told me to wait. Another officer joined us, a tall, serious fellow named Sergeant Bennett. He started asking me questions. Why was I poking around near that barn? Who else was with me? Did I notice anything out of the ordinary? I told him about the tire tracks, the busted flashlight, and that weird smell. He nodded, looking more concerned by the second. They told me to keep my eyes open and let them know if I remembered anything else. That evening, back at the campground, Donna seemed on edge. She leaned close and whispered that a couple of strangers had been asking about a traveler with an RV. She didn't recognize them, but they seemed impatient. I thanked her and headed toward my spot. That's when I noticed a different RV parked at the far end of the lot. It was dark green with tinted windows. I hadn't seen it that morning. I busied myself cleaning up, tried to relax, but my nerves were shot. I called Mike over for dinner again. He arrived with a bag of potato chips and a weary expression. He'd seen the new RV too. Said he'd walked by earlier and glimpsed two men inside, both wearing old ball caps, both stocky with rough edges. Didn't look friendly. I tried cracking a joke about how we weren't exactly in a 5-star resort, but Mike wasn't laughing. We settled in my RV after dinner, flipping through random TV channels for background noise. Around 10, Mike said he'd head to his own camper. He was tired. I locked my doors and tried to sleep. Sometime after midnight, I heard a faint thud against the side of my RV. It sounded like someone pressing a palm against the metal. My heart hammered in my chest. I held my breath, hoping it was just the wind. Another thud came louder. Then it stopped. Morning brought a sickening discovery. Mike's camper door was open. Inside, everything was tossed around. Clothes, maps, leftover pizza on the floor. No sign of Mike. I rushed to the caretaker's office. Donna was frantic. She said she'd heard shouting in the middle of the night, but was too scared to go outside. She thought it was just rowdy folks. I called the police. Sergeant Bennett and another officer showed up, took our statements, and started searching the grounds. It didn't take long to find a fresh set of footprints leading into the field. They found Mike behind a low hill hidden by tall grass. He wasn't alive. There was blood on his shirt, and he had bruises around his neck as though someone had tackled him. Donna wailed. I felt my eyes burn. Mike had been an easy person to like. There was no reason for any of this. The police spread out. They discovered footprints from at least 2 people. They matched the size of those I saw near the barn. The green RV was gone, but a flattened patch of grass showed where it had been. Bennett cursed under his breath, then turned to me. He believed whoever took Mike was connected to Jeff Parsons' disappearance too. Now they'd likely run. But as we looked around, we spotted a man striding past the far edge of the field. He wore a ball cap and carried what looked like a shotgun. Bennett signaled us to stay back. He and his partner sprinted after the stranger. I couldn't stand there. I followed, keeping low, trying not to make noise. The man broke into a run. He was wide-shouldered with a cruel set to his jaw. Another figure emerged from behind an abandoned tractor. That second person tried to swing at Bennett. Chaos broke out. Gunshots echoed, tearing through the stillness. I ducked behind a tree stump and heard shouting. An officer tackled the second man, pinning him to the ground. The first man fired at Bennett, grazing his shoulder. Then Sergeant Bennett fired back and the man collapsed. More shouting. A wave of tension froze me in place. It was over in seconds. The second suspect, pinned by the officer, yelled, "Curses." He wore a dirty plaid shirt streaked with mud and sweat. He looked strong with scars on his hands, no remorse in his eyes. The police secured both men. The first one was badly hit, not likely to survive. An ambulance arrived, more officers cordoned off the area. They found evidence linking these men to the barn where Jeff Parsons' body would eventually be discovered. They had apparently been kidnapping travelers and robbing them, then discarding them like trash. Mike just got in their way. A few hours later, I stood by my RV, numb and exhausted. Down hovered, offering me coffee and a shaky hug. She was trembling, face pale. The police took statements again. They collected everything as evidence, from tire tracks to bullet casings. I wanted to pack up and drive off, but they told me to wait until morning in case they needed more details. I left Mount Sterling the next day, my mind full of regrets and images I still can't erase. I keep thinking about Mike's casual laugh the night before. That could have been me. Maybe it should have been. I still crack jokes when I'm nervous, but the sparkle is gone. I drove away, watching the morning light stretch across the horizon. I'm just thankful I survived. Hey, I'm Wesley Carmichael, and this happened to me back in 2012 near Lake Powell, Arizona, when I was touring around in my beat-up RV, looking for cheap campsites and good fishing spots in the desert sun. I'd saved for years to afford that old RV. It smelled like stale coffee and gasoline whenever I drove it too fast. But it was mine, and it gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt since my college days. I've always been a sucker for wide open spaces and quiet roads, something I trace back to my grandfather who took me on long trips through the Southwest when I was a kid. Back then, I would do anything for an excuse to skip class and see new sights. By 2012, I figured it was time to do it again, only on my own terms. I wasn't married, had no kids, and my consulting gig let me work online from pretty much anywhere, so it all lined up nicely. I pulled off the main highway late one afternoon, found a dirt side road, and drove until I saw a cluster of small RVs parked in a clearing near the shoreline. The water glowed a deep turquoise in the lowering light, and the rust-cold rock formations looked like they'd been stacked by some ancient builder with a sense of humor. I snicker at the idea, talking to myself like I often do. Wes, this must be the best place in the world to watch the sunset and eat kinchili, I said. I parked alongside two other campers. One belonged to a retired couple, Ron and Meredith, who waved me over. The other belonged to a family with two restless kids and a moody teenager wearing headphones. They looked nice enough, so I settled in, fired up my little propane grill, and started telling stories about the best catfish spots I'd known growing up in Mississippi. The next morning, I rolled out of my bunk earlier than usual. Couldn't sleep well that night. I felt a little edgy and I blamed it on the desert ear, but I also had a strange sense that something wasn't quite right, like the hush that comes after a dropped glass in a diner. I brewed coffee, stepped outside to greet the day, and saw that the family's RV was still shuttered up tight. Ron and Meredith's rig, though, was wide open with the door ajar and a half-emptied lawn chair lying on its side. Huh? I mumbled. Maybe they went for a walk. It nagged at me for reasons I couldn't explain. After breakfast, I followed the path down to the water's edge. That's when I spotted a single shoe floating near the reeds. It was a man's sneaker turned upside down. I plucked it out with a stick. Nearby, muddy footprints led away from the shoreline, weaving back toward the camp. I wondered if somebody lost the shoe in some clumsy fall, but I got a sinking feeling in my stomach. This was too odd. I decided to circle back to check on Ron and Meredith at their RV. I knocked on the side panel. The door swung open. Inside was chaos. Drawers yanked out, a coffee cup smashed on the floor, a dried puddle of something that might have been coffee or something else. My heart pounded in my chest. Ron, Meredith. I called. No answer. That's when I noticed a shape behind the passenger seat. It was Ron, and he wasn't breathing. There was a dark mark on his temple like he'd been struck with something heavy. My hands started shaking, and I nearly dropped my phone trying to dial 911. No signal. I stepped outside, throat tight with panic. I ran across the clearing to the family's RV, pounded on their door again. No answer. My mouth went dry. I tried to steady myself. The father, Tony, was often fiddling with a fishing rod out by the shore. Where was he now? I took a few steps around to the side window and peered in. Couldn't see much except half-packed suitcases on the floor. My mind raced. Should I break in, see if they're hurt? Or maybe they just driven off early, leaving the RV behind for some reason. It made no sense. Nobody would leave an RV out here without a reason. I decided I needed help. I scrambled back to my own camper, jammed the key into the ignition, and started driving toward the main road to find a place with a cell signal. I bounced over ruts and rocks, cursing every jolt. Halfway up the path, I spotted movement in my rear view mirror. Someone running. I slowed just enough to see a tall, wiry man with cropped black hair and a scar across his left cheek. He wore a dusty green jacket that looked too big for his frame. He raised his hand as if to wave me down. "Help!" he yelled, but his tone was off. Desperate, but also angry. I had no idea who he was, but something in me whispered not to stop. I pressed the gas pedal. The man sprinted after me, but he couldn't keep up. A 4 mile up the road, I found a spot with enough elevation for a single bar of signal. Shaking, I managed to dial 911. I was sputtering about the body I found. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, but the signal died. I glanced in the rear view, expecting that man to burst out of the brush. The road stayed empty. For a moment, I considered turning around to rescue anyone else who might be in trouble. But terror won out, so I kept going. As soon as I hit the county road, I saw a sign for a small gas station. That would be my best bet for a landline. I pulled into the station's dusty lot a few minutes later. The single store attendant, a lanky kid with a baseball cap, let me use the landline. I got through to the local sheriff. "We'll send someone out," the sheriff said in a flat voice like he'd seen it all. "Wait there until we arrive." I hung up, walked outside, and tried to calm myself. That's when I saw the same wiry man step out from the far side of the station, right next to the ice machine. He locked eyes with me. No idea how he got there so quickly. He reached into his jacket. My stomach clenched. I ducked behind a battered soda vending machine. A second later, the glass door to the station shattered. He'd fired a shot from a small handgun. The attendant screamed from inside. I had nothing to defend myself with but a cheap, folding knife. My RV was parked on the other side of the pumps, at least 20 yards away. The man's footsteps crunched on the gravel. He called out, "Where's the phone?" in a harsh voice. The kid inside must have been hiding behind the counter because I heard him say, "I don't know, man. I don't know anything." Then came a second shot. I peeked around the side of the vending machine and saw the attendant slumped behind the counter, not moving. My whole body went rigid. That man had just killed 2 people I knew of. Maybe more. And I was next if he found me. I weighed my options. I could stay hidden or I could try to slip out back. My RV was my best chance of escaping. So I crept around the station side, crouching low, hearing him kick through shelves and spill candy bars onto the floor. The moment I reached the corner, I sprinted for the driver's door. My foot caught on a pothole and I stumbled, whacking my knee on the side mirror. Pain shot up my leg, but I dragged myself inside, slammed the door, and fired up the engine. Head throbbing, I mashed the gas. I heard a bullet ping off the rear panel, but I didn't stop to check the damage. I roared down the highway, going way over the speed limit, ignoring the fact that my side mirror was dangling by a thread. Adrenaline blurred everything. I forced myself to keep looking forward, though I kept expecting him to appear in my rearview mirror in some stolen car. Eventually, I came upon a convenience store surrounded by a few other vehicles. A battered truck with a sheriff's insignia was parked out front. I felt a wave of relief so strong I nearly burst into tears. The officer inside was grabbing a cup of coffee. I staggered and panting. He looked alarmed at my condition, and I explained everything in a frantic rush. He told me to stay put, radioed in the details, and tried to calm me with slow, measured questions. Another squad car arrived within minutes. They rushed off in the direction of the gas station, lights flashing. Hours passed. I gave the deputy my statement. The next day, I learned from the sheriff's office that a suspect matching my description, scar on the cheek, wiry build, had taken off on foot. They found the station attendant's body, and from the descriptions in the campsite determined that Ron and Meredith had been attacked as well. Meredith was missing entirely, but we all feared the worst. They told me the search would continue, but I never heard any confirmation on whether she was found alive. I stayed in a motel for 2 nights, trying to wrap my mind around what had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ron lying behind that seat and the attendant on the floor. My chest would tighten and I'd jolt awake, soaked in sweat. I felt guilty for not going back to that campground right away, but I realized I could have just as easily ended up dead. In hindsight, I think calling for help was the only real choice I had. I left Lake Powell as soon as the sheriff finished with my statement. I haven't returned since. Some nights I still dream of that tall man stepping out from the shadows of the gas station, eyes locked on me, that scar twisting across his cheek. I still drive an RV from time to time, but I'm more careful about where I park. I guess we all learn to live with the things that haunt us. I'm never sure if they found him. I'm not sure I want to know. My name is Phoenix Sanchez, and this happened to me back in 2011 in the Great Smoky Mountains, where I decided to take my old RV on a much-needed getaway for some fresh air and a change of scenery. I was 32 at the time, working as a freelance photographer in Atlanta. I needed an escape from endless shoots and editing sessions. My sense of humor often got me in trouble with certain clients. Some folks don't appreciate witty remarks about their hats or pose requests, but I'd like to think I have a good heart. That year, I saved up enough to buy a used RV from my cousin, who swore it was reliable enough to drive to the moon. It wasn't pretty, but I loved the freedom it promised. My plan was simple. Spend 2 weeks winding through the back roads of East Tennessee, stopping wherever I felt like it, snapping pictures, maybe grilling a few burgers under the stars. I rolled into the Great Smoky Mountains on a warm afternoon in mid-May. I'd spent the morning reorganizing the clutter in my cramped living space, camera lenses, cooking pans, random souvenirs from pit stops. The place smelled like coffee and leftover pizza. I parked at a small campground, one that looked underused. The worn sign by the entrance read camp, and I didn't see many other RVs. I remember feeling relieved because I'd get plenty of peace and quiet. A cheery middle-aged woman at the campground office assigned me a spot near a shallow stream. She said, "You'll love the view at sunset," and handed me a map. After setting up, I walked down to the stream. The water moved slowly, reflecting patches of sunlight that filtered through the tall trees. My plan was to catch a few photos of the late afternoon glow. I crouched low, testing different angles with my camera, focusing on the stones in the creek bed. I might have stayed there an hour if I hadn't heard an engine back at the camp. A battered sedan pulled up near one of the empty RV sites. Out stepped a man wearing a threadbare jacket and worn boots, followed by another man a bit taller with a shaved head and a tattoo snaking down his neck. They were both older than me, probably in their 40s, and had a rough, hungry look that made me uneasy. I tried to ignore it. I was there for solitude, not for scanning other campers like some suspicious neighbor. Still, something in the way the taller man surveyed the camp gave me a jolt of worry. He stared at the few RVs parked around, zeroing in on everything. License plates, open windows, anything of interest. After a moment, I thought maybe he's just cautious, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling. That evening, I fired up my small grill, flipping a couple of burgers and humming to myself. A younger couple in an RV, 2 sites over, waved and introduced themselves as Carla and Dennis. They seemed friendly enough and invited me to play cards. Later, I was about to accept when the shorter man from the battered sedan emerged from behind some trees. He walked right past my grill, slowed, and gave me a glance that felt too intense. He didn't speak, just looked at the spatula in my hand and the sizzle of the meat. Then he kept going. I forced a grin and half nodded, but he never returned the gesture. At nightfall, I set up a portable table and joined Carla and Dennis. We dealt out a few hands of poker. I lost $1 or $2, joked that they were card sharks, but it was a good time overall. We laughed about odd roadside attractions we'd seen, a giant metal chicken sculpture, a home of the world's biggest sweet potato, that sort of thing. My plan was to call it a night around 10, so I stepped outside to get a breath of air. That's when I saw 2 flashlights cutting across the dark beyond the sights. They weren't the normal bobbing beams of late arrivals. They darted around as if searching. A chill swept through me, though I tried to shake it off. I headed back to my RV, locked the door, and dropped onto my narrow bed. Before drifting off, I heard an engine rev to life, then tires crunching gravel. Maybe somebody was leaving late, or maybe they had an emergency. My last thought was that I should mind my business and get some rest. Early the next morning, I poked my head out, hoping for a quiet sunrise. The battered sedan was still there, but the men were nowhere in sight. In fact, the only people I noticed were Carla and Dennis stepping out of their RV with anxious expressions. Dennis motioned me over. He said, "Hey, Phoenix, do you know anything about the older couple a few sites down? Their RV door is open and nobody's answering." I walked with him, and sure enough, the old couple's RV door hung wide open. Inside, the place looked ransacked, cushions tossed, blankets pulled off the bed, chairs overturned. No sign of them. We exchanged worried looks. Then Carla called out, "Hello?" Her voice echoed in the cramped interior. Nothing. Dennis stepped in further and I followed, my heart pounding. Everything was in disarray, like someone tore the place apart looking for something. We found the wallet on the floor, some cash still in it. But that didn't comfort me at all. I saw a coffee mug shattered under the table. There was a smear of what looked like dry blood on the counter. Just a small streak, but enough to confirm that something awful happened. We rushed out and told the campground manager, who seemed alarmed. She said she'd call the local sheriff's office. That's when the battered sedan drove by, creeping down the campground road. The taller man in the passenger seat stared at us again. This time, I noticed his tattoo was of a coiled snake looping around a pistol. It felt like he was daring us to do something about it. He smirked. Then they turned a corner and disappeared from sight. The sheriff's deputies arrived not long after. They asked a lot of questions. Carla and Dennis explained what we found, and I mentioned those two men and how they'd been wandering around at odd hours. One deputy took notes. Another walked over to where the men's sedan was parked, only to discover it was gone. No sign of the man or of the older couple who had disappeared. The deputies dusted for prints, took statements, but they wouldn't let us near the crime scene again. By midday, the quiet campground bustled with law enforcement. A search party spread into the nearby woods. Carla and Dennis decided to leave, but I stuck around. I felt responsible somehow, like I should help, or at least share any photos I might have taken. I combed through my memory cards from the day before, searching for any shot that might show the sedan's plates or a clear angle of the men's faces. My lenses had mostly been pointed at trees in the stream. That regret gnawed at me. Later that afternoon, while the deputies roamed, I slipped away to walk a narrow trail near the creek. I needed fresh air, needed to quiet my thoughts. That's when I spotted something on the rocky ground, a small silver locket. It was dented and muddy, and inside was a photo of an older woman in a floral dress. Could she be the missing camper? My stomach lurched. I picked up the locket and peered around, noticing broken branches and footprints in the dirt. I followed the prints. They led deeper into the woods. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it would jump right out of my chest. But I kept going. Then I saw a spot between the trees where the leaves and undergrowth were matted down. And that's where I found the first body. It was an older man face down, motionless with a wound across his back and fresh blood staining his clothes. My hand shook, but I knelt, checking for any sign of life. There was none. No one should see such a thing. I felt numb with shock, but forced myself to back away. I would have run straight for the deputies if not for the sound of snapping twigs behind me. I froze. Peering over my shoulder, I saw the shorter man from the sedan. He held a large hunting knife, the blade glinting. His eyes looked wild and determined. I stumbled sideways, my voice stuck in my throat. He stepped forward with slow, steady intention. I realized there was no talking my way out. He lunged for me, and I managed to twist aside, but he caught my arm with the blade, leaving a burning slash. Panic flared in my mind. I tried to keep distance between us, but he kept darting in, swinging the knife. I saw the taller man appear with a rifle in his hands. He aimed at me. Before I even knew what I was doing, I dove behind a fallen log. The shot rang out. A tree trunk splintered near my face. My ears rang. Leaves fluttered. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline spiking. I heard them cursing, and I realized they intended to kill me without mercy. I took off, weaving through the trees, trying to stay low. I tripped, nearly fell headlong, but caught myself and kept going. My arm throbbed from the gash. My breath came in ragged bursts. The men followed, snapping branches, scanning for me, their voices echoing through the pines. As I neared the campground perimeter, I spotted two deputies about 100 yards away. They saw me. They shouted, "Stay down," and raised their weapons toward the men behind me. I dove to the ground, trembling, and heard the commotion. the men shouting, the deputies barking orders. Another shot fired. Then the forest went quiet, except for the pounding in my ears. I looked up to see the shorter man face down, the knife skidding away in the dirt, and the taller man pinned under two officers, his rifle tossed aside. Later, I learned that the older woman's body was found not far from her husband's, hidden by a clump of bushes. Those men had apparently been on the run for multiple crimes, targeting campgrounds for easy victims. They'd murdered the older couple, hoping to steal valuables from their RV. Then they turned on me when I got too close. In the aftermath, I sat with the paramedics near my RV, an ugly bandage around my arm. I gave my statement to the deputies, still shaking, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I kept thinking how a trip meant for peace and solitude ended in bloodshed. After a few hours, the campground fell silent again, except for a few hushed voices. I drove away at first light, not knowing where I'd stop next, only sure of one thing. I'd never look at another quiet campsite the same way again. My name is Andrew Pierce, and this happened to me back in 2008 in Waveland, Mississippi, when I took my rusty RV down there for what I thought would be a peaceful break from my usual day-to-day hassles. I'm a laid-back guy from Nebraska, and I used to work as a handyman for our local grocery store, did the freezer repairs, retiled the restrooms, that sort of thing, and I'd saved enough money to buy a second-hand RV so I could explore a few coastal areas on my own schedule. The plan was simple: eat shrimp po' boys, stroll along the beaches, maybe catch up on reading. I figured I'd collect stories to share at family gatherings, mostly funny mishaps or weird roadside diners. Turns out I'd get a story that still makes me lock my doors before I even turn off the engine. I parked at an old RV campground just a few miles from the shoreline. The place seemed quiet with a few rigs scattered around, some older than mine. My spot was at the edge of the property near a cluster of pine trees, and I felt good about having both shade and a bit of privacy. In that first afternoon, the sun was bright and the breeze carried a salty hint from the water. I remember smiling to myself, thinking it was all going to be so relaxing. That evening, I walked over to a local seafood joint called Ricky's Crab Shack, some rickety building with neon lights that flickered overhead like they hadn't been changed in 10 years. I struck up a friendly conversation with a couple from Ohio who were also on a road trip. They mentioned they were going to stay only one night and move along the next morning. We chatted about fishing, good burger places, and how folks always assume Midwesterners can't handle seafood. We parted with a laugh, and I headed back to my RV stuffed with crab and feeling unreasonably confident about my cooking skills. The next morning, I saw that Ohio couple packing up in a hurry. They looked rattled. The wife just gave me a half-hearted wave. I walked up to see if everything was all right, but they clammed up. Finally, the husband mumbled something about trouble in the area, about a strange man skulking around at night. Then he hopped in his truck and sped off. I shrugged it off. I've heard all sorts of stories from the road, and I thought maybe they were spooked by a raccoon or had read too many sensational news headlines. Still, I made sure to lock my RV before I went off to the beach. I spent that afternoon lounging in a fold-up chair by the water. The breeze was mild. Pelicans floated by, scanning for fish. I dozed off for a few minutes when I noticed a local fisherman walking along the shore toward me. He was gruff, probably in his 60s, wearing a salt-stained baseball cap that looked older than me. He introduced himself as Walter. We started talking about the best spots to cast lines, and he mentioned a small inlet near the end of the beach. Then he dropped his voice and mentioned there had been a rash of small crimes in the area. RV break-ins, missing gear, a stolen boat. He said the sheriff was trying to keep it under wraps for tourism's sake. Walter suggested I keep my wits about me and maybe avoid walking alone late at night. That advice stuck with me. I'm not a paranoid person, but I decided not to roam the campground after dark. That evening, I read a paperback thriller in my RV with the blinds closed. I felt cozy, but now and then I'd think about the Ohio couple's anxious departure. Something must have shaken them. The wind rustled the pine branches, and each time a cone dropped, I found myself jumping. I figured I just had an overactive imagination. The next morning, I had a craving for a walk, so I strolled down to the inlet Walter had told me about. The sand there was darker and the water was calmer. No sign of folks swimming or fishing. About 100 yards off, I saw something bobbing in the shallow surf. I squinted, and that's when I made out the shape of a large plastic cooler. I walked closer. The lid was cracked, and inside I found some rotting fish. The stench was so strong I nearly gagged. A few crabs scuttled away. Disgusted, I kicked some sand over the fish guts and tried to shut the cooler, but the hinge was busted. I decided to head back. Just as I turned, I spotted footprints leading away from the cooler. They were big, and they seemed recent. The tide was low, so I couldn't follow them long. I chalked it up to an irresponsible fisherman dumping his catch. It gave me an uneasy feeling, though, so I left in a hurry. Back at the campground, I noticed a commotion by a battered white RV near the entrance. Several people stood around murmuring, and one of them was the campground manager, a wiry man named Chuck, who always wore overalls. He looked pale as a sheet. When I approached, I saw a man lying face down in the dirt, blood near his neck. My stomach twisted. Chuck dialed 911, and I heard him say, "He's dead." The group of us just stood there in shock. Chuck ushered me away from the scene as if I were a family member who shouldn't see something so awful. A few minutes later, sirens wailed and the sheriff arrived. I felt my heart pounding, and all I could think was that it wasn't some petty theft. This was a homicide. The sheriff questioned us, but nobody had any clue what happened or why. I told him about the footprints in the cooler, though I wasn't sure it was relevant. He took notes but didn't reveal much. After a while, the ambulance came to take the body. I remember the metallic clank of the gurney folding and the hush that fell over everyone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint noises, maybe real, maybe my imagination. About midnight, I caught a glimpse of something outside my window. A person, moved along the row of RVs. I quietly slid off my bed, grabbed a flashlight, and switched off all my lights. My pulse was hammering. Slowly, I peered out. The figure stopped near a black RV 2 rows away. That's when I heard a muffled scream, cut short. I jerked back from the window and nearly dropped the flashlight. I should have called the sheriff right then, but my hands were trembling so much I couldn't even dial quickly. Eventually, I managed to punch in 911. My voice came out in a shaky whisper as I explained someone was attacking a camper. I gave them the campground name and whispered my lot number. After I hung up, I realized I was holding my breath. My mind raced with questions. Was it the same person who killed the man earlier? My eyes returned to that distant RV. For a while, everything looked still. Then the door swung open and I caught sight of a tall man with a shaved head wearing a dirty tank top, stepping down the small metal steps with something slung over his shoulder. I realized it wasn't a something. It was a person limp. I froze. He laid the person on the ground for a moment and looked around with a tense, deliberate motion. It looked like he was checking if anyone was watching. My flashlight was off, and I stayed in the shadows trying not to breathe. Suddenly, the man dragged the body toward a cluster of trees at the edge of the property, not far from where I had parked. My heart felt like it was going to burst. After a few seconds, he disappeared into the darkness with his victim, leaving the RV door still wide open. Then I heard him muttering, cursing under his breath. My hand shook and I crawled to the driver's seat. I wanted to get out of there, but the idea of starting the engine felt like painting a target on my back. Instead, I grabbed an old baseball bat I keep by the driver's seat for emergencies. I thought about turning the key anyway, but I couldn't do it. I felt paralyzed by fear. Before I knew it, I heard the wail of sirens. The red and blue lights reflected in my side mirror, and I nearly cried with relief. The tall man must have heard them too, because I saw him sprint back from the tree-ine. He lunged into his own truck, which was parked next to that black RV, and started it up. Gravel flew as he roared out of the campground. The sheriff's car swerved in, stopping only long enough for one deputy to leap out, while another vehicle tore off after the suspect. I ran outside yelling about the victim in the trees. The deputy shouted for me to stay put, but I followed him anyway, half crazy with adrenaline. We found a woman lying there. She was alive, but barely. Her shirt was soaked in blood. The deputy radioed for an ambulance. My legs felt unsteady as I knelt beside her, trying to keep her conscious. Her eyes fluttered open for a second and she tried to speak, but I couldn't make out her words. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and rushed her away. The sheriff came back, looking grim. They didn't catch the attacker right then. He'd sped off onto the highway. As they secured the area, I saw another deputy walk by carrying a small evidence bag with a blood-stained knife inside. I knew that must have been the weapon. My stomach churned. It felt like dawn took forever to arrive. I didn't sleep at all. Chuck offered me coffee and we stood there by the dirt road near the entrance, staring at the tire tracks the killer's truck left behind. I tried to crack a nervous joke, something about it being a heck of a way to end a trip, but my voice shook so badly that Chuck just patted my shoulder. The sheriff suggested we pack up and relocate to a different site until the investigation settled. I left Waveland later that morning, my RV rattling like it was ready to fall apart. I glanced back at the campground as I pulled out, the pine trees silhouetted against the soft light of dawn. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. That sense of peace I'd wanted was gone. Even now, I triple-check all my locks every time I park for the night. I don't think I'll ever look at a quiet campground the same way again. I'd give anything not to have witnessed that man's brutality. Part of me wonders if the woman survived. I never got to find out. All I know is that trip changed me more than I could have ever imagined. I'm still on the road, but these days I'm always expecting the worst.